theory has to have a priority.
Capitalism and artificial intelligence are the same thing.
The dimension of the future has disappeared.
There is actually no representation anymore.
There is no final resolution to contradiction.
Militant proletarian snake handling over abysses never gets much wilder than this.
Welcome to The Dangerous Maybe. I'm Michael Downs. My work focuses on the fault line in contemporary online theory between the CCRU and the Ljubljana School. I'm researching the differences and similarities between these two schools of thought, especially their different interpretations of desire, time, and capitalism. I am the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog on Medium and Substack, and I am also the author of Capital versus Time Energy, a Zizekian critique of Nick Land, which is soon to be republished in a new edition. In this very special episode, I'm joined by Nick Land and my good friend and collaborator, Nance. Be sure to check out Nance's YouTube channel and Substack, 3 Billion Nances. He and I have been doing a series of videos where we cover some of Nick Land's essays in his book, Xeno Systems, as well as all topics related to artificial intelligence. I also want to thank my friend, Christian Michael Poynter, who just so happened to make the beat you are currently listening to. Check out his music on Spotify and YouTube. I'll leave links down below. If you like this video and want to support my work, you can do so by becoming a patron over on Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description. I also want to thank all my current patrons for their support. If you want to support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. And without any further ado, let's start the show. All right, everybody, welcome to The Dangerous Maybe. We are here with a very, very special guest to discuss a very special topic. Today, Nick Land has joined us to discuss the Numogram. And for anybody who is familiar with Nick's work or the CCRU's work, you know that the Numogram is something very central to the project of the CCRU. And it's continued to be a huge influence on Nick's work ever since. And yet, much of the Numogram, what it is, what's its significance, very much is shrouded in mystery. And it's been that way for ever since the CCRU received it. But Nick is here to do something very special. He's going to unpack the Numogram. He's going to give us a basic introduction to it and just share some of the core insights and meanings that he's gotten from it, and ultimately what the whole thing with the Numogram is all about. So it's a very special conversation because there's a lot of people who are interested in the Numogram and have been for a long time and have always wanted to see Nick discuss it in detail. And so the wait is over. Here we are. And so, Nick, thanks for joining us. Great to have you here, especially to talk about something that so many people have been fascinated with ever since it flooded into the world from the outside. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great to be back. Thank you guys for the invitation. And obviously my hope is that by the time we finish here, it doesn't seem to you that I am hoarding some secret knowledge about the Numogram and for perverse reasons refusing to share. So, I mean, I expect, any level of excruciating patient interrogation that you think is required to avoid that notion that there's something being held back here. I mean, literally everything that I can say about it, I'm hoping to say about it.
Fantastic. Nance, what are you thinking?
That's amazing. I mean, this week, Mikey, we've been studying and getting prepared and talking about it is a joy and a privilege, and I don't want to fangirl too much, but we do take this seriously. And Nick, you said before we were going, what is a philosophy of the outside, or what would it be to have a connection with the outside? That question, I think, is a very serious question. And yeah, I think we're here to talk about that. Like, it's not just the madness that comes on when you've been staring at this diagram and the whorls and the plexes and the gates. It does have a tendency to become opaque if you stare at it for too long. So I'm looking forward to, hopefully, maybe not clarity, but maybe a little bit more familiarity with it all.
Okay, great.
So I think the best thing to do is basically just start with the simplest of questions. Nick, what is the numogram? What makes up its core mathematical relations? And I guess we should start with that.
Okay. So, I mean, as I was saying a little bit before we came on, I've got two parallel sets of notes about this to try and orchestrate things. And the most recent one, I think, is the most coherent. I'm going to try and stick with it. And it's like my best attempt to go through this in an order that proceeds step by step in an intelligible way. I think that the sequence is as coherent as I kind of made it in terms of the topics. And actually, I thought that the best starting point, it will, partly because it leaves a number of paths shooting off that we're not going to be able to follow all of them, but we're going to see where they come from, is actually the very simple little diagram that the CCRU had deep down in the 1990s that we called the Barker spiral. And I've been promised that this will appear and be graphically evident to people.
Yes, we'll do that in post.
But I'll still try and just talk through a little bit. Because what is important about the Barker spiral is the fact that it joins together two sides, two various attempts to compute decimal numeracy. And back in the CCRU days, very much, I think, we went on a particular slightly schlocky narrative with this that I think has been quite influential, and which I've stepped back a little bit. Because one side of the Barker spiral, which connects the decimal numerals to some on each side to 10, is what we called Atlantean, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. And the other side, which sums the decimal numerals to make 9, we called Lemurian. And I think that what's going on in that option, it's a certain attempt, a very crude, I think attempt is maybe not right, because at the time it's something much hazier than that, to try and just get a very clear diagrammatic sense of the crisis of adoption of decimal numeracy in Europe, and we'll come back to that. So there's these two things, Atlantis and Lemuria, AL. I think that's Crowley's AL, and AL is the kind of his great Kabbalistic key. It's constant between Hebrew, Greek, and then the CCRU and glossic Kabbalah. in each case it adds to 31. Okay, I'm going to definitely try and engineer a pause in just one more stage just before really running with it. So I just very little bit about the Atlantean side of this. So on the Atlantean side, as I say, all the numbers are connected to make 10 each time. Because of the fact that if you have even numbers, it's not neat. It's much neater, as we'll see, generally much neater on the Lemurian side. You have a dot in the middle, which is 5 and 5. 5 and 5 makes 10, obviously, but it doesn't give you anything neat. If you turn it on its side, it's very much the same. Sorry, just 1 second. So I need to just do a little. Sorry about this interruption. Yes, yeah. It's the same shape as a Manoa, i.e., you have a central candle, and then you have a set of expanding rings, each like leading to 2 points, which are candles on this. So actually, there's quite a lot of Jewish sort of esoteric symbolism that will echo at certain points in this. This is definitely one of them. If you put a mirror down the center of the Barker spiral, so you mirror the Atlantean side, you get a series of concentric circles with a dot in the center. Now, the concentric circles are extremely interesting for a number of reasons. I'm going to be like fast forwarding us to the Renaissance, where everything really gets started. And just recently, I've been like on an amazing Italy tour, seeing a lot of Renaissance art and seeing this repeated visual icon of Renaissance or medieval cosmogony, which is a vast set of concentric circles. The whole notion of the universe, which was obviously is geocentric, relatively small structure by our modern terms, was conceived as a set of concentric circles. Earth in the middle, then you go through the elements, it goes water, air, fire, then you're onto the planets. So it goes Moon, Mercury, Venus, boom, 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 through to Saturn at the end. Then the zodiac, as they say, the fixed stars, the celestial spheres, and you're in then these Empyrean realms of religious thought. So that is the basic diagram of the kind of scholastic tradition of the old tradition that is feeding into the Renaissance, and that is the mode of thinking that even in a very hazy, cloudy way, even back in the 1990s, the CCRU was trying to capture in its notion of what is Atlantean, what is the architectonic order of the eschaton. It's a series of concentric circles radiating out from a central point. And it's Atlantean because it's the model in Plato's Critias, which is by far the richest source of Atlantean material feeding into the Western tradition. This is how Atlantis is conceived. It's conceived as a concentric system, basically, or the primary description of it is as a concentric system consisting of perfectly circular canals and bits of land between them, and a central point in Atlantis, a central island. And even more significantly, it begins with a marriage of Poseidon and Cleito, and it says of Poseidon at the Genesis, he begot 5 pairs of male twins. brought them up and divided the island of Atlantis into 10 parts, which he distributed between them. So this is the Atlantean decimal source in our tradition. And it's to do with 5 pairs. So, and as we've seen, even though there's a peculiarity about the central point in this, it's like slightly messy in that way. Conceiving decimal as a set of twins is how you get rolling with this thing. It's how you, both sides of the Barker spiral do that. The Atlantean side, as I say, they add to 10. And I think on that note, I'll just say one tiny little thing. That's a kind of a footnote type of thing to that, which is just to say, I really badly miss having an AOE education. I mean, in my twilight years, I sort of think, we obviously were just like, Lemurian punks in the 1990s. The AOE was just a punching bag. It was everything to do with tradition and authority and whatever was being put in that slot and just abused. Whereas, I think, it's ultimately, I would say my sympathies are still Lemurian, but I wish I was saying that as a dissident, as an occult dissident based on a very solid AOE education. Classical languages, all of this stuff, soaked in Plato, read biblically as this occult authority. And so part of definitely where I am now is it's sort of too late to do everything out of the AOE. That was so much not what was happening before, but that's kind of what I'm trying more and more to do, because in a way that I think we'll have to talk about a little bit more later, the AOE represents the actual European occult tradition, the Hermetic tradition. It's the Knights Templars, it's the Masons, it's Pico and Ficino and all the Italian Renaissance philosophers or occultists. It's John Dee going right through to the Rosicrucians, the Golden Dawn, Crowley and the OTO. It's basically the foundations of all of that. I hope I said the Masons most of all. Yeah. That's what they built. That's their cathedral. And even if you're going to find weird stuff coming out of the walls, even if you're going to be on some strange Lemurian drug, watching weird stuff coming out of places it shouldn't come in that cathedral, it's like that's the cathedral. That's the edifice in which the
apparatus
really
of capture.
Yeah, well, capture too, but more than that, production. It's like it's built this stuff. So I don't think it's just. I think this attempt to just negativize it's incomplete. The Barker spiral says it's incomplete, but also it's necessary. You only get the spiral if you get both the Atlantean and Lemurian side together make a spiral. Lemurianism on its own isn't a spiral at all. If you just mirror that side, I guess you just also get like a set of concentric circles. It's not, you don't get escape. You don't get anything exciting. The spiral comes out of this Lemuro-Atlantean convergence and the tension and that comes out of that.
Did you also say the friction between them?
Yes.
Okay. So, one of the questions that comes to mind, because with Plato, where he's talking about the Atlantean set of twins are males, I've noticed in the CCRU, all the lemurs are always referred to as her. Is that in response to
that's
that.
that's Lemurianism again. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like punk Lemurianism. I mean, I'm not going to completely whatever it, blot it out at all. But yeah, that's
Okay.
what it. That's what it is. So you can mentally compensate.
Okay. So I think it's with where we're at. I think this is probably a good time to kind of run through those basics. So the numogram is a time map, a time maze, and the question is, if somebody looks at it for the first time, it's very perplexing. They don't know what they're looking at. So it's kind of, I think, essential to go through the basic components of it.
Yeah.
And so it's comprised of 5 syzygies that run from, based on the decimal system of 0 to 9. And out of the syzygies, we get currents, we get gates, and each gate has a channel. And this whole thing is based on mathematical relations of culminating and plexing. I wonder if you could just kind of take a second and walk us through these mathematical relations and share how you think of these basic operations.
Yes. Okay. This is great. I mean, a second might be slightly optimistic.
Okay. I'll get as much time as you want, actually.
Now, there's different ways. One natural way, which I think I will shelve under time pressure, but maybe we can come back to do this, is actually to start off with the tree of life, which everyone interested in Western occultism is very familiar with. It also is a series of 10 zones, the Sephirot, and paths between those zones, and is seen as a basic cosmic map. So there's a certain sense where these things are inevitably in some kind of communication. And I would say even perhaps a competitive relationship in some way. And the tree of life is emanationist. That's to say, it arises, it's based on stuff that arises in the early centuries of the Christian era. It's a kind of, as all these things are, there's an element of hermetic theological innovation going on there that wants to present itself as very traditional. So it has a kind of complicated type of time that will become, I think, even more intense when we get to the Renaissance. So I kind of kick that a little bit up the road. And its mode of decimal is definitely inclined to the Atlantean, which is to say, while there is a 0 introduced later, and it's kind of off the top of the tree of life, the tree of life begins with 1, and it goes down past 9, 10, Malkuth right at the bottom, just suspended after you've zigzagged across these 3 columns of the tree of life. You reach Malkuth at the end. And Malkuth is what kind of 1 repeated, like you've basically done a circle. And some people have, I think, quite traditionally, I don't think this is just a kind of weird modernist trick, have just represented the tree of life as just this endless sequence that we get to Malkuth, which is 10 in the previous tree of life and becomes 1 in the new one, and then down you go another 10 and another 10 like this, as a repeating decimal pattern. And we're going to see that echoed in the normally received Pythagorean tetractys, which is also 10, and it also has in its normal representation an Atlantean numerical operation, in the sense that it basically is counting from 1 to 10. And that's the. Well, we have to come back to the tetractys anyway, so maybe I won't get lost in this. But I'll just say that these very familiar systems have an Atlantean numerical orientation. It's very specifically identifiable in the sense that there's no 0 actually intrinsic to the numbers being worked with. And the philosophical basis of it is this emanationist philosophy that comes in, basically, that finds its philosophical expression with the Neoplatonists. Porphyry, I think, in its most kind of rigorous and fully expanded design, with Plotinus, who gives this full emanationist philosophy of everything coming out of the One. The One takes on this. Plotinus isn't a Christian. He's brought into Christian affinity. He's not a Jew either. He's not part of Abrahamic theology. But the One, his God is the One, and the One takes on this, theological, strongly theological flavor, mystical theological flavor. It's already that basically your philosophy, your religion, and your philosophy of arithmetic are the same. It's like what a religion really is at this point. Now, when you're drawing something like this, when you're writing something like a Neoplatonic philosophy, what a religion is a philosophy of arithmetic. It's an understanding of numbers. It's a numeracy. It's basically veneration, in these terms, veneration of the One. And this will be complicated in the later Jewish Kabbalistic stuff with the Tree of Life. But I think in this period, it's really very strong and very clear that that's what's happening. Yes. So, what happens then to when you go, what's the basic thing that's happening when you're moving onto the numogram? When you're moving, and what the numogram is a Lemurian map that seems to have the same agenda, it's dealing with the 10 zones as they are in the numogram, Sephiroth as they are in the Tree of Life. Not the same in the sense that obviously go from 0 to 9 in the numogram, not 1 to 10, but the same in the sense that it's decimal numeracy given this cartographic occult representation. And what happens is, if we go back to the Barker spiral momentarily, is that everything is adding up to 9, if not adding up to 10. And 10, as we've seen in this emanationist philosophy, to add up to 10 is to add up to 1. Malkuth is just Keter recycled. So the veneration of the One and a form of decimal numeracy that sees 10 as its culmination, that counts from 1 to 10, they are the same. 10 is the vehicle of the valorization of unity. 9 is not that. 9 is not that. Okay, we haven't actually started quite constructing the numogram yet, but okay, I now have a set of little episodes or a set of little topics organized under the master theme of what I call Masonic arithmetic. And I think that by the time we've done Masonic arithmetic, the numogram just falls into existence with just perfect spontaneity.
Okay.
So maybe I can. I know I am saying what I was worried of doing. I'm just falling into monologue, a pedagogic monologue. Yeah, maybe you should interrupt this bit
Well,
before I
I'll
start.
just say, so I think one thing, and I don't want to, because I want you to go down this line of notes that you have, but it is important to stress, though, that I think the introduction of zero into the Lemurian time map is quite significant. And zero isn't just a decimal. Early on in your thinking and thirst for annihilation, there's always these references to zero. And I always took it like you're not just talking about a decimal. Zero also is, and I think to put it in later Deleuze-Guattarian terms, correct me if I'm wrong, zero is also somewhat of another way of talking about the full body without organs. It's full potentiality. It's not nothing in the sense of like just absolute nothing whatsoever. It's the fullness of virtuality. Is that maybe a way of thinking about what you mean by zero?
Well, I think we're going to stick to this a lot.
Okay.
Frankly, I come at it from several different angles because, I mean, my ultimate answer is just as it is for unity, which we will have to come to, is like, rather than having a philosophical answer to this, like what do I make of unity? What do I make of zero? Is to say, well, let's look at the numogram and what is that telling us about unity and telling us about zero. How is it positioning them? How do they work? What kind of paths do they open up? What relations do they open up? But also, zero is gonna come in a lot in the next sort of raft of discussion, which is, as I say, Masonic arithmetic, because zero after sort of the Vedic numerals zero, after traveling out of India slowly through the Arab world, Persian and then Arab world, meeting much resistance in various places, catalyzing important things along the way, arrives most importantly in northern Italy at some period, blurrily, it's not a clear moment, it's a field of intensities in northern Italy around about the early Renaissance. Or at least it's, that what the Renaissance, I want to say, my strong claim here is that the Renaissance, ultimately, there's lots of things going on there, but what it ultimately is the incorporation of zero, the adoption of zero. That is what fundamentally it is. And, people have said before, that's not only in arithmetic, it's not only in all the forms of, scientific calculation, bookkeeping and economic and financial accounting, banking. It's also in Renaissance art, visual art, perspective. It's the vanishing point. The zero is the convergence of all your perspective lines. So it organizes a visual, pictorial revolution as well as a financial revolution, a wider commercial revolution, a scientific and technical revolution. Zero is in all of that. It's really, modernity is zero doing its stuff in Europe initially. And of course we can then ask, well, why is its impact in Europe so much greater than it has been previously on this path it's taken? I think, if that is fine with you, because that's something I'd probably bracket at the moment. I think it's an important question, but I think we could take that as a separate thing.
Okay. Well then.
So when I say, yeah, go.
Nance, what are you thinking?
I don't want to get ahead, but I keep coming back to kind of Cantor and the empty set and I'm relating that to zero, especially talking about the Barker spiral and Barker speaks and this and that. And I'm just wondering if this zero is matching up with that, like the infinite production of the empty set itself. And that's why zero is significant.
Well, I mean, there can be no doubt that when we get set theory, which is, I think, not until late in the 19th century, you know, zero has been doing its stuff. And I think that moment that you're pointing to is maybe better understood as a kind of, you know, celebration within mathematics of what zero has done than an inaugural moment. Because don't forget, zero has also been the thing that's earlier catalyzed calculus. You know, the ability to think, the infinitesimal and the use of the infinite as the reciprocal of zero in formulating calculus has already blown up that entire mathematical revolution, and that's not even the first thing it does. So, yeah, I'm hugely sympathetic, but I think that's not going to put a boundary around what it's done. It's rather going to just cap what it's been doing.
Quilt it, maybe, from our perspective.
Yeah, retroactively give meaning to it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, how about
Cantor's obviously interesting because he makes these references to Jewish mysticism, and so he obviously, I think it's very hard often to read his stuff when it isn't hard mathematics, which is of course completely beyond me. I'm not pretending to sit there with a Cantor paper and just nod along to it or whatever. But in his commentary and his attendant work, it's very hard for him to not see him having a tree of life in his mind, you know. And as I say, there's the Ein Sof, there's three levels of zero that are put above Keter. I think relatively late in the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition. I think this is actually a Renaissance thing that is being retro archaized, but it for sure is, I think, feeding into Cantor's mathematics. You know, he talks about Aleph for a reason. You know, it's like it's a serious reference, I think.
So how about so you have this series of notes that are going to build up to the numogram. So how about we go in that direction?
Yeah. Let's do another little jog through that. So okay. So Masonic. What is Masonic arithmetic? Masonic arithmetic is basically what the Western Hermetic tradition has understood as the foundational numerical operations. And it's very simple, actually, because there's only two. And they're both extremely interesting. And the first one of these operations is what we know as digital reduction. And digital reduction is something that, like, I think lots of people do it a lot anyway. Mark Fisher used to say to me, like, oh, you know, I was a kid doing digital reduction. You know, I would just like have phone numbers and I'd digitally reduce them. And I had no idea why I was doing it, but it was just like something to do. It simply involves, you've got a string of modern numerals. I'll say to talk about modern numerals, I'll say Vedic numerals. How about that? Like, so you've got a string of Vedic numerals, 0 to 9, making up a number with place value. And you simply ignore the place value and treat it as a sequential addition. So say you've got the numbers 20, 25. Rather than saying, oh, you know, there's first of all the thousands, hundreds, tens, whatever. So we've got 2 in the thousands, 0, no hundreds, 2 tens and 5. So that's 2000 and 25. Rather than doing that, you simply say it's 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 5 equals 9. So what's going on there? It's like, okay, it's a very... everyone involved in any kind of numerology does this all together. Even the most, like, what's the equivalent of pop astrology? There's a pop numerology, and they will for sure be fully competent in digital reduction. So you have to ask, well, what is happening when someone does digital reduction? And I think there's really no serious question about the fact that what is happening there is a collision between the ancient numerical order and the modern numerical order. It's something that can only happen on that cusp, because the ancient numerical order, whether it's the Hebrew alphabetical numerals, the Greek alphabetical numerals, or, which will, for our purposes right now, work just as well, the Roman alphabetical numerals, it's completely sound. If I can just bracket off that weird negative function, that shorthand in Roman numerals where you write 4 as for IV rather than I. That's a very degraded sort of numerical operation. It's convenient but very degraded, and people systematically throw it out. Again, like, looking at Roman numerals in Italy, I noticed a lot of times they would be done in a way that was mistaken by those standards. We're taught at school that if you're writing 4 in Roman numerals, you have to do IV. Lots of times it's I. Actually, when you see these ancient inscriptions, it makes much more sense. It's much more coherent. Has much more numerical integrity, because the principle of all these ancient numeral systems is exactly that you can do that operation that we've just looked at in digital reduction, and it will make perfect numerical sense. If you've got a Roman number that is MMXXV, you can just say it's M plus X plus V, 1,000 plus 1,000 plus 10 plus 10 plus 5, 2025. It's completely normal and natural to do that. Every time you're using those numbers, that's what you're doing. You're simply adding them up. And as I say, that's the same for the Hebrew alphabetical numerals, the Greek alphabetical numerals. The most typical and popular, obviously, in Europe throughout its history to this point are the Roman numerals. This is what you're doing. You're just adding them up. This is not sound once you have place value. Once you have the modern values, you write 2025, you do not mean 9. You do not mean 9. You mean 2025. If this is business accounts, that matters a lot. If someone does digital reductions before repaying the loan, of $9,999, oh yeah, here's the $36 I owe you. That's a problem, So it's obviously quite reasonable to treat this as just a mistake. In the modern numerals, it's a mistake. But what you're doing with digital reduction is you're deliberately doing that mistake. You're deliberately treating the modern numerals how the ancient numerals was treated. And so when we do it today, in a certain sense, we are engaged in this deep retrogression, 500 years, to a point in which people were still adjusting to the fact you can't do the things with the newfangled numbers that we always knew you had to do with the old-fangled numbers. You just can't do that. It's a mistake. And it's the schools that are obviously taking it now as their responsibility to tell people you don't do that. You treat the old numerals, you treat the Roman numerals as a special quaint case that have different rules of operation. The modern ones are not like that. They have place value. You can't just add up all the numerals and expect them to make sense. So yeah, like in my little, I'm going to give a pause in 1 second. Just to say, okay, so that's half of the whole of Masonic arithmetic. Once you do decimal reduction, you've got half of it already.
Okay.
I think that there's a historical point to make about this. That is like, this can only happen. This thing that's essential, Western Hermeticism, as I say, it requires Masonic arithmetic. Masonic arithmetic requires digital reduction. Digital reduction can only happen when you have a collision of two fundamentally different number systems. That's to say, it only really happens in the Renaissance. Western Hermeticism is, in a sense, is a Renaissance phenomenon. When it happens today, we're rehearsing or reactivating a Renaissance topic, which is the newness, the innovation of the new numerals. And when we talk about ancient Hermeticism, going far back before the Renaissance, we are engaged in an interesting process of kind of retro protection. Because the core of actual esoteric Hermetic intellection does not make any sense before the Renaissance. Renaissance Italy, Renaissance Hermeticism is the first time in history, the only time in history, that Hermetic intellection actually makes sense, actually works. You know, and when people say, as we get the word Hermetic from the discovery of this great book, this massively influential book of extremely weird, we might say CCRU influenced people, might say hyperstitional book. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to the Corpus Hermeticum. This text that is supposedly written by Hermes Trismegistus, and it was supposedly written in such deep antiquity that it mutually influenced Moses and Plato. Moses and Plato are according to this, what became relatively mainstream Italian Hermetic interpretation of history. Moses and Plato are both students. They, just to say, they're not necessarily overlapping, but they are taught by, ultimately, Hermes Trismegistus. He's the common intellectual source of the Abrahamic religious tradition and of Greek philosophy. And so, we're putting his dates far back before the birth of Christ. Like, I probably have a date somewhere for it, but I'm just going to say it's distant antiquity. And the point I'm trying to make here is that is, everyone knows, but this is why that is bogus, is because there is no Hermetic intellectual capability before the Renaissance. It's all retro protection. It's there are texts and whatever. I'm not to say there was nothing written. I mean, as we've already said, there's like Neoplatonism. There's influential stuff. Plato has written the Critias. It's not that these texts don't exist, but the fundamental conceptual operator of the Hermetic intellect does not exist until modern and ancient numerals collide, allowing you to do digital reduction. In the ancient numerals, there's no reduction. In the Modern numerals, you simply can't do that operation. You simply cannot treat them, you can add them together in different place value. Digital reduction crosses, it's a diagonal line between those two different numerical systems, and it only happens at that point in history. And before then, therefore, Hermetic intelligence does not exist except as something retro projected out of the Renaissance or later. So I know I'm banging on about this a lot, but I think this is a really crucial point. And maybe I should do another little hesitation now before I did go on to the other side of Masonic arithmetic.
But no, I mean, I think this is a great example of, retro causality plays such an important role in the CCRU, and so for you, even the emergence of the occult tradition really is a retroactive event, right?
Yes, it has to be. It has to be. Once you understand how it thinks, at least what the basic methods are, those methods are incomprehensible before this particular catastrophic event that initiates modern history. So we don't have Hermetic antiquity until we have modernity happening. It's not at all the model that there's ancient Hermetic wisdom that then in some way transitions into modernity. No, that's not it at all. There's a moment that modernity and ancient Hermeticism are reciprocally produced from the same event, which for the sake of convenience we're calling the Renaissance Hermeticism, which is this basically event in the history of numerical systems.
Yeah, and it's like once the event happens that retroactively opens up that space of meaning, then it's like everything was leading up to that event, but it's only on the basis of that event that we can see it that way.
Yes, now when we read Critias, the five twins mean something to us. And, to say, well, did they mean the same at any level to Plato? I'm not just going to say no, because this is a question, well, what level of retrocausal, retrochronic action are we talking about? You know what I mean? You can have many different levels from a relatively trivial one, which everyone accepts. And so there's a whole historical tradition about how the Renaissance invented the Hermetic tradition. And, you can't read about the history of Hermes Trismegistus without that, because everyone knows that Hermes Trismegistus, the writings probably again date from this Alexandrian period, the early centuries AD. And so the fact that they're pushed back and there's this movement to create antiquity, to imaginatively create antiquity, is actually not controversial. It's like all the historians of this totally accept that is true. Whether you then go on to say that, forms of xeno intelligence actually are able to retrochronically inject cognitive material into ancient cultures is a more controversial suggestion. But you've already started at least thinking of that possibility once you're here. I think. It's like, the question is not how much retrochronic activity is there, it's just how deep does it go and what is the actual extent of this? Like, is it completely overwhelming, or is it actually something that we can just manage as part of a kind of sensible historical narrative about the past?
Because look, there definitely is levels to this. I mean, so one of the things that I do think Lacan was really great on was emphasizing, so his term for whatever fixes the meaning of something retroactively called the quilting point de capiton. And so on people, it's almost lost on people, but every sentence, the meaning of the sentence is fixed by the ending, whether you put a period or a question mark or whatever. I mean, it's even at the level of just a basic sentence, there's retrochronic temporality at work in it. And then, but it is this expansive thing where, for CCRU, it's also like super intelligence. It's the way you guys would talk. It's pulling itself into the, it arrives from the future, and you were always playing with this retrochronic thing where, just like this event in relation to number, how it retroactively fixed the history that came before it. It's like once, especially, super intelligence is here, if we stick around for any amount of time, we'll see the whole history of capitalism at that moment as seen like it was inevitably leading to this emergence of super intelligence.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's not uncontroversial, but that was definitely along the CCRU tendency for sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Nance, what are you thinking right now?
I'm actually, so as you're talking about digital reduction, I kind of had a dawning moment of realization that the same thing that happened with numerals and numeracy, where there's a tension between the old way and this new way, and the new way is convenient for capital. The new way is convenient for the ledgers, and if you make these mistakes, there will be big problems. The same thing happened with typesetting in the keyboard, and I wonder if, like, as you were talking, I kind of fantasized about a person who took the QWERTY keyboard layout as the alphabet, and what would that do to a person? We know the alphabet as alphabetical ABC, but say there's a child who's born today and they think the alphabet is QUE. Like, if we could harness that, or maybe our descendants will recognize modern typesetting as a kind of alphabetical reduction moment where something else becomes emergent or imminent. Because it's meaning. It's how the meaning is determined, and previously it was because it was useful to count in this way, and then conditions happened and arrived just so that capital found it more useful to number things in a different fashion, and that tension, I think, it's interesting.
Well, your example of QWERTY is great and very germane, actually. I mean, there's a resource that everyone who's engaged in a lot of this kind of Kabbalistic calculation uses, that's just called Ciphers News with a Y, ciphers .news, and they've added relatively recently. I mean, I'm in a slow timeline, so by relatively recently, I mean several months ago, in fact, 2 different QWERTY ciphers. So there is now a kind of, there's a formal resource that can be used to sort of explore your insight there, where you can compare an alphanumeric and a QWERTY cipher and see what's going on there. So I think this is extremely germane, and I'm sure is going to be productively explored by people.
Okay, so you want to go into this next line of notes and
yeah. So the next one is triangular numbers. That's the only other thing you need. I mean, there's a little bit in the numerogram of standard arithmetical operation, extremely simple, of just, I guess it's not just addition, but summation. I mean, adding to 9, twinning, that operation, I guess, is just addition. And then subtraction, as you were talking about the currents, that you have to be able to take one number from another. So those are just standard arithmetical operations. But the other Masonic operation, which is not very, which is a bit less edgy in terms of formal maths, because formal maths totally accepts there are these things, triangular numbers. So it's not like you're doing anything particularly dissident with it. And that is just to say, I saw it at one point described as theosophical multiplication. So that was like claiming it as a hermetic operation. And the point is, it is a crucial operation. And that's just simply that you just add consecutive numbers together. So, 1 is, I guess, nominally a triangle. But if you add 1 and 2, that gives you the number 3, which is a triangle. Then you add 3, 6 is a triangle. 4th triangle, you add 4, that's 10. Now you've got the tetractys, because, the Pythagorean thing, you're into these questions about decimal. And the question about decimal is tied up with triangles. So there's a lot of interesting triangles. And they appear all the time in various sort of hermetic operations. It's kind of one of the basic things people do with numbers. It's the thing that you need to do for sure to be able to construct the numogram, as well as digital reduction, these very simple addition and subtraction operations. You also need to do this triangulation function, finding the trigons. The other Atlantis book of Plato's, there's much less rich content on Atlantis, is the Timaeus, which is also a book hugely obsessed with triangles. I mean, basically, Plato thinks the universe is made out of triangles. I mean, it's absolute triangle obsession. So what do I need to say about triangles other than that, other than that you need them? I think that one thing, and I'll just briefly say, is, well, if someone says, well, why not, squares and pentagons? There's all these other types of more obscure sort of geometric numbers. And it's interesting to just try with squares, because if you try doing a numerogram where you have squares rather than triangles, it just does nothing. It dies. You can't get out of the time circuit. It's like, it's interestingly dead. So it's an experiment worth doing of just the demonstrative superiority of the triangle in this context. Yes, hang on. I've slightly, my order, I think, of this, I'm just going to rearrange slightly. But, which is just to say, so once you've got these two operations, digital reduction and triangulation, you're in a position to explore the decimal numerals, and the numerogram will basically fall out of it. But it might be informative if you do it without any reference to the numerogram. Pretend you don't know anything about the numerogram. You're definitely not heading towards the numerogram. You're just playing around with decimal numerals. You're taking it that this is Masonic arithmetic. Your question is, well, what does Masonic arithmetic tell us about the 10 modern decimal numerals, 0 to 9, the Vedic numerals? And the rules of a little game that you can do here is that you're just allowed to do any combination of these two operations. You can triangulate, and you can do digital reduction as many times as you like in any direction with these numbers, see what happens. So, I think it's worth seeing what happens. You start with 0. 0 as you can imagine, is kind of going to be obstinate. You know, you can't digitally reduce any single digit, so we can't start with digital reduction of any of them. You can't get a triangle out of zero. What's the triangle of zero? The zeroth triangle is zero. You're not going nowhere. So you just goes zero. Zero goes to zero. Zero is on its own. Move on. I'll get through all of them if people can bear it, but I won't go in the right order. I'll go in an order that's much more convenient.
Okay.
So I go in the order. People have it in the back of their mind, but it's not necessary that you think of it like this. This is complete set of operations in itself. It doesn't require the numogram, but it helps for where we're going. If you just imagine the numogram in the background, and we're starting at the bottom, zero is the absolute last number in the numogram. We've done it, it's on its own, we know that. We can draw a line separating it off, like it's a separate phase. We now go to the next, what's the next number up? The next number up is 9. 9 we can do things with. You can triangulate 9. The ninth triangle is 45. 4 and 5 make 9. I haven't got the 45th triangle on me, and I'm afraid I don't have it memorized, but I can assure you that you can, if you wanted to triangulate up a lot first and then digitally reduce down, you're still going to get the same result, which is 9 goes to 9. So it's sort of a bit zero-ish in that way, except there's more steps. And we'll see if you do 8, which is going up one more on the numogram. 8, the 8th trigon is 36. 3 and 6 is 9. 8 also goes to 9. And actually, those are the only numbers that go to 9. So we draw another line. We've done one face that's just got 0 in it. We've got another face that's got 2 numbers in it now, 8 and 9. We're sticking with it's graphically consistent with the numogram. Now, going up a little higher, we've got 1 just above 8, and we've got 4 as the bottom side on the left and 7 on the bottom side of the right. Okay, 1 just behaves very like 0. You can't, the first trigon is just 1. It doesn't go anywhere. Digitally reduced 1 is 1. So it's just 1. 4 goes to 10. We've already seen in our little preliminary thing about the tetractys that 10 is 1. 1 and 0 is 1. So that goes to 1 too. 7, 28, 2 and 8 goes to 1. So 1, 4 and 7, we've got 3 now. We had 0, that's 1. We had 9 and 8, that's 2. We had 1, 4 and 7, this is 3. Now go all to 1. Finally, I'll just try and do this quick. I mean, 2, the second triangle was 3, so it goes to 3. We'll deal with it there. 5, 15 goes to 6. We'll deal with that there. 3, the third triangle is 6. So we're flipped over to 6. But 6, the sixth triangle is 21. That goes back to 3. So we're looping between 3 and 6 here. 5 and 2 go into that zone, and then 3 and 6 just loops. So we've got a fourth basin. There are therefore only 4 decimal basins that you get from these 2 operations of Masonic arithmetic. If you just do any succession you like of triangulations and digital reductions, you get 4 phases, just a 0, an 8 and a 9, 2 numbers, 1, 4 and 7, 3 numbers, 5, 2, 6 and 3, 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is, therefore, the esoteric tetractys. When you hear the tetractys, the normal presentation is, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's the exoteric version of it. That's how we understand it. That's how Pythagoras is integrated with emanationist Neoplatonic philosophy, with the Sephirot, with the Tree of Life, with the valorization of unity, because we know that anything that goes to 10 goes back to 1. It's dominated by 1. The exoteric version of the Pythagorean tetractys has 1 at the summit, 1 is the cap of the pyramid, 1 dominates the whole of the system. It's competitive with the Tree of Life as being one of the great Hermetic diagrams for the exaltation of unity for esoteric theology. But now we have a very different tetractys. It's our 10 numerals now, 0 to 9. Very, I think, rigorously, if quickly, we've seen that they fall into these levels of the pyramid: 1, 2, 3, 4. Because, I probably don't have to repeat that. It very neatly actually goes up the numogram, but even if it didn't, who cares? It stands on its own. You have an esoteric tetractys, and the numbers of the exoteric tetractys, 1 to 10, 10th triangle, 55, as we know from our little delve into Atlantianism, 5 and 5 is 10 equals 1. Again, valorization of unity. The esoteric tetractys, 0 to 9, 9th trigon, 45, as we've already seen, 4 and 5 is 9. Not the valorization of unity. In fact, we have the empty summit. We have 0 at the top of our esoteric tetractys, or at the bottom of our model of the numogram. So, I know I've rushed through that, but that procedure, that looking at the base, you now understand decimal numeracy to an adequate level of how the numogram is going to be put together. It divides into these 4 phases. It only goes to 4 different basins of attraction. Those basins of attraction are irreducible. They don't fall into one another. They don't all, 1, 4, and 7 go to unity, but they don't all go to unity. This isn't some emanationist scheme where everything finally beautifully converges back on Malkuth equals 10 equals 1, or some other system that folds everything back into unity. No, it's not. There's these 4 different completely irreducible basins of attraction, phases on the numogram that simply do not reduce. There is an irreducible multiplicity. And therefore, it's flat in this fundamental sense. It's flat because it doesn't fall under any pinnacle. There's no... The capstone of unity that we saw in the exoteric tetractys is not functional for it. It's an empty summit. There's nothing there. It's not dominating the system. These basins of attraction are autonomous. They're not tending to fall into unity at all. And so the numogram really is telling exactly that, just with more cartographic elaboration. That is the fundamental esoteric payload of the numogram. It's the fact that it isn't Atlantean, it isn't emanationist, it isn't something that is falling into some primary dominant unity. That is the Atlantean story. And the Atlantean story, while I've really tried to be I'm not going to be patronizing and say generous to Atlanteans, because as I say, it's built the whole tradition. It would be ridiculous, but the numogram is not Atlantean, and the numogram is not showing what the Atlantean tradition wants us to see, which is the folding of everything into an ultimate, primary, dominant unity.
So, that right there raises like some philosophical connections for me, where the Atlantean thing seems to be in the tree of life. There's a hierarchy built into it as a central principle, whereas the numogram, I can't help but start thinking about it in terms of rhizomatic connections. It's open-ended. It's always geared towards becoming. It's not finished, and so disharmony is at work in it, but perhaps that's exactly why it could be more productive than the other one, maybe.
I mean, it's definitely, I think the basic divergence is one, as we've mentioned and will continue to talk about, is zero is at work in the numogram. It's not at work in the tree of life. And secondly, the numogram is a cartography of true multiplicity. Number is not about something folding into unity. One is a number. One is a number among many others. It's like, so this, we've already seen the fact that there's this really important event that happens, I think, especially with Neoplatonism. Plato himself is no doubt already presaging it, in which the number one takes on this extremely important theological valency. The way you think about numeracy is almost the ultimate way you're thinking about God. It's like, it's like God is almost functioning as a figurative vocabulary and set of associations, not visual icon for a certain apprehension of number and for the supremacy, the transcendence of unity. So it's a kind of, all of the theological and religious discussions are ultimately about numerical relations, and particularly about this thing about, is multiplicity or is it not reducible? And I think we can see like the numogram falls on the multiplicitous side of that controversy. I just say one more thing on that. It's just to say, when I say controversy, I think that there's this crucial thing of the fact that our tradition, as part of the fact that it's been dominated by unity, it tends to think that what you're looking for is to be able to think and philosophize and do all the things that have been important to this tradition, even up to talking about this kind of stuff, is find a logic that is going to be the master key to thinking. You understand really what truly is logic, and logic thought as something that is in some kind of coordination with the dominion of unity. So that's to say, it's basically going to be a binary logic. And I'm not saying that in order to make this move, the typical move we're all used to, after Hegel, after deconstruction, after Schelling, after every move that has been made to problematize binary oppositions. It's not to say, no, there's a fundamental operation that scrambles all your binary opposition. It's instead to say, no, what there is polylogic. What there is an irreducible multiplicity of logical functions that are distributed arithmetically And there is no master thought of that can be returned to logic and returned to the dominion of unity. It's not that there is a concept, a logical concept of the numogram. The numogram does not come out of a logical concept. It comes out of decimal numeracy. And it comes out of decimal numeracy in a mode in which the multiplicity of the numbers is not reduced. There is not a commanding logic. As we've seen, there are a small set of arithmetical methods that allow you to make these cartographic connections. But the logical relations that are then encoded, I think, are not simply even back reversed to those mathematical operations. It's rather that they're actually distributed in all the relations that this exploded, explicated decimal machine then exhibits. So it makes it look like, in a sense, it's a fool's errand of a certain kind. Or, to put it more generously, it's a very recognizable Atlantean Hermetic aspiration to find a master logic, even if that master logic is deconstruction, even if it's dialectics and Aufhebung, even if it seems subversive. That isn't the point. The point is that it's in the service of a commanding unity. Because there's this one way that you think, which makes everything fall into place. And what I hope the numogram, I think, should always come out of demonstration in people's minds when they're thinking about it. Well, how did this thing, as a demonstration, how was it produced? How did it appear? And what made it? And what made it is not a commanding idea. There is no commanding idea. There's multiplicity, there's number.
And so in that regard, but is this where back then you saw this compatibility between seeing the numogram this way and Deleuze and Guattari and rhizomatics, and is that where you saw this convergence between the two?
Well, I'm not really exactly sure. I mean, the point is, we were just steeped and baked in Deleuzeanism, especially capitalism and schizophrenia. And so that was just our idiolect or whatever. I mean, that's just the way everything was talked about. So, and I think there are some resonances. There, I think, are also a lot of disresonances, or, there's things that I think don't really work. I mean, one thing, for instance, just start with one example. As you know, Deleuze and Guattari hate trees. Now, I 100% think the numogram is the tree of knowledge. I mean, you've seen my little demonstration of that, my Kabbalistic demonstration. I mean, so I think it's like I'm more interested in rethinking what is a tree than I am in saying trees suck, we want grass, I think it's like, what is a tree? I think, of course, there is a question about branching, and Deleuze and Guattari don't like everything being about branching. I think now more sympathetic to branching, but I'm also sympathetic to their wanting to delimit that or to contextualize it. But I think our history is full of trees, there's the tree of life we already seen. There's the tree of knowledge. There's the cross is a tree. Odin is enlightened on the tree. Buddha is enlightened under a tree. I mean, I don't think trees are just something you can throw in the trash. I think it's for us to make sense of trees, not to use arborescence as a kind of criterion of philosophical insufficiency.
Well, let me ask this point of clarification then, because throughout this you've used the word multiplicity, and the first thing that comes to mind is Deleuze and Guattari. Are you using it in in that framework, or are you using it in a different way when you talk?
I think I'm using it entirely naively and innocently. And if I hadn't read any Deleuze and Guattari, it would be the same. All I mean by it is what happened in that demonstration of the esoteric tetractys. It's to say, multiplicity is what you've got when a project of unification is shown to be not only to fail, but to be impossible.
Okay.
And that gives you multiplicity. And anything more to the notion of multiplicity than that is surplus value. It's, so as I say, I'm very open to this, having all these interesting resonances to Deleuze and Guattari, whatever, but it's not that some philosophical notion of difference and multiplicity from Deleuze and Guattari should be telling anybody how to think about this. This is just showing them something completely innocently, clearly, and unproblematically that doesn't require a philosophical context for its intelligibility, I think.
Okay. I mean, and I think one of the things that also would help is, because so far we've talked about the numogram and we've talked about the role of decimals and number, and it's been purely mathematical. But then you take an example, and I wonder if one of the reasons this number is significant to you is just perhaps it's an interesting triangle. So 333 is always a number that seems to, on Twitter, if something in alphanumeric Kabbalah adds up to 333, it's significant to you. And so on the one hand, even I think about the Trinity. Well, the Trinity, each member of the Trinity is one, but ultimately there's a way where each is the other two, and so 333 could be seen as a number for the Trinity. But I guess the thing that I don't understand sometimes is how content comes to be associated with these numbers. So for you, as far as I understand it, 333 has to do with a demon that Aleister Crowley encountered Qurans on. And
no, but that isn't right. That isn't right. And I know that's the myth, but that's completely wrong. Choronzon in alphanumeric Kabbalah is 209. It's not 333.
Okay.
It has to be Choronzon's shadow or some other construct to get it to 333. So it's not, Choronzon is not 333 at all. My first lucid encounter with 333 actually is much more recent, but which is to say it goes back maybe 2013 or 14, something like that, where some commentator just said, oh, by the way, I think alphanumeric Kabbalah was out there, and I find it a bit hard to remember exactly what I was doing with it at that point. So, I can't psychologically reconstruct this very well, because it was familiar methodologically, but also unfamiliar in terms of content. But this person just said to me, oh, dark enlightenment is 333, which it is. And I had no idea, of course. And then I thought, wow, that's interesting. And so I started being attentive to 333s now, and I kind of adopted a 333 kind of tag. And that was my first, I think you're quite right to say, my first sort of hit, you could say, with this. And so, I think there's a really important question about this, which is your question. Like, how do you get content in terms of number?
Because I really want to go down. I just want to ask for clarification, though. So, Kenneth Grant, when he talks about Qurans says his number's 333, says it to Crowley, and then also Qurans is linked to another being, Shugal, whose number is 333, so it adds up to 666. So this isn't anything that's influencing your usage of 333. Is that right?
No. That's perfect coincidence. I mean, it's possible. I mean, I read lots of Kenneth Grant. It's entirely possible that something unconsciously was, some seeds of something, but they were definitely unconscious. I mean, I was not in any way deliberately.
I pulled these aside, like outside the circles of time, and then
yes,
outer gateways. They sound resonant.
I definitely read a lot of Kenneth Grant, but frankly, I don't think I got anything from his numerology, from his Kabbalah.
Okay.
And that's because I think, I mean, this is another huge, interesting question, but I don't think his numerology, I think, is all based on Hebrew values. I mean, Choron's on, I don't think is 333 in any, there's a whole bunch. As I say, I've given you this link to this Cyphers News. It's overwhelming in its content. So it's all these different ciphers. I have it always up, but I have like six different ciphers up at a time. But if I wanted to, I could have 40 up. I mean, it would be so people could, depending on what people can cognitively cope with. And so there might be some old English cipher or something that makes in English Choronzon equal 333, but I think Choronzon is 333 because of its Hebrew gematria value, nothing to do with English.
That's interesting. Okay.
And the whole of it, there's a question again. It's too deep to go into with us now. I mean, I'm too hazy about it, so it's my incompetence as well as time issues. But did Crowley, Kenneth Grant for sure doesn't know what he's doing with Kabbalah. I'm sorry. I mean, he just doesn't. He's an interesting guy, but he doesn't know that. Crowley, does Crowley secretly talk about English Kabbalah or not? Because he pretends not to. He too pretends that all his Kabbalistic values that he's interested in all come from the Hebrew, actually. I mean, I'm trying to think. In 1707, there's some stuff about Greek, but I think it's all basically Hebrew gematria. But a lot of weird stuff happens in English. And you probably know it's the one that was for the whole CCRU, actually. I shouldn't personalize it. This was a kind of really threshold point, was when the law of Thelema, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, is 777 in alphanumeric Kabbalah, and obviously Crowley's collection of Kabbalistic writings is called 777. Now,
weird coinky-dink, right?
Well, it's overwhelmingly the most important phrase in the OTO, and the most important phrase attached to Crowley's name without any question. I mean, these guys, when they wrote letters to each other, they just had in the header, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. You know what I mean? It's like they basically had it tatted on their forehead. Mm-hmm. And so something's going on there that's, I think I can only really see two possibilities. One is Crowley is the unwitting vehicle of a Kabbalistic miracle. The second is that he's playing some really cunning game and talking to people that know without doing so in a way that is obvious to almost anyone. As I say, as far as I'm concerned, his followers do not get the point if in fact he is trying to communicate a point to them. So, and that goes way back. We're back in the mid 1990s or whatever with that moment. Yeah, sorry, I've gone down a slight rabbit hole with this.
Maybe we bring it back to where the question of how content gets associated with. So, for example, we have a bunch of mathematical relations, and any mathematician would hear how you explain the numogram mathematically and go, sure. The question is, how do lemurs or demons or entities or even planets come to get associated with, and each one of these numbers takes on meaning and significance?
Yes. I mean, I think this is a big and very open question. So, I think it might have to be answered in parts, because I think there's lots going on here. I don't think it's a simple question.
Okay.
I mean, back in the first decade of this millennium, when a few people doing this hyperstition blog wrote a little article that's called Against Numerology. And my point on that was, I think, way too simple-minded, really, but not uninteresting. And it was an attempt to really, I straw man numerology a lot, in that maybe it can be debated how fairly or unfairly I did it. There is a whole zone of numerology that is very pop astrology, and I find it hard not to be a little bit supercilious about that. And that is very tied up with quickly establishing relations between significant numbers and content. So, the one guy, I won't name him, I saw him secondhand, talked about it in a book about number that I was looking at. But his whole method is that, he gets people's names, numerically reduces them, probably by the simple cipher that is called on Ciphers News, that is called English Ordinal. It's not it's very crude, but it's not an uninteresting cipher, and it just is A is 1 through to Z is 26. So you give each letter those numbers, digital reduction. You end up obviously with one number, and that number has content. So there's basically you never get 0 out of this. So you always get 9 categories. And so there are 9 basic personality types, or whatever. You know what I mean? That if this guy, he's a professional numerologist, I guess rich Hollywood people will kind of pay him to do the numerology on them. They tell him their names. He gives them a digit and says, "Oh, that means you're this sort of person." One of 9 basic types. Now, I sort of feel it's probably wrong to just completely assume there's nothing to that. But that is very strongly my tendency. Any mathematician, say, or any secular materialist, rationalist sort of person would say that has 0 meaning to it at all. That's just complete fuzzy, random garbage. I'm close to them in that. I'm close to them. And this Against Numerology was sort of making that point. It was saying, look, this isn't what we're trying to do here at all. We're not trying to, there's not this kind of dictionary of carefully numbered meanings that we kind of find a number and then we look it up in this checklist and then we say, oh, that 7 means this, and then, so here's the meaning. That's not
like an occult DSM-5.
I mean, that's there are lots of people doing that, and that is kind of an inherent decay tendency. You know what I mean? It's like once you start doing this stuff, once you start doing Masonic arithmetic and getting into Renaissance occultism, people 100% are going to end up doing this. You can just tell. You know what I mean? Any prophetic Italian Hermetic occult philosopher is going to say, look, let's be realistic. In 300 years' time, there's going to be a guy with a numerical DSM manual who's doing this kind of junk pop Kabbalah. That's just numerology. That's just like baked into the fact that this can happen. But I think it like basically can't be that. It basically can't be that. So, so go the other way and say, well, what is it instead? And I think this is a sort of important work in progress that's happening. And actually, we do actually have to loop back to the Numogram again,
Okay.
a little bit, because we're kind of halfway through this list, and some of the stuff we need to get to. Well, we're more than halfway through.
Yeah, and if you think, because we can bookmark what we're talking. If you want to come back to it, and if you think some of your notes would help here, then
well, why don't we just take this a little bit further, and then maybe we can do whatever looping seems convenient.
well,
I'm just
retrochronic loop
at a
figured
certain point. There's a bit more Numogram content that we need. I think that will feed in help,
and we definitely want that. So,
but I just say on this question, I think it's so what you're saying. I think what you're doing with these Kabbalistic ciphers is you're saying that there's a channel of communication. And in fact, I think I used to be a very extreme alphanumeric Kabbalah chauvinist. My position was definitely there's just various forms of outdated, rotting crap or newfangled, confused crap, and there's the alphanumeric Kabbalah. And, if you're not doing alphanumeric Kabbalah, you're basically just wasting your time. That used to be my position. I now don't think that. I think now any coherent channel is used. I think it's just like every potential channel of communication is an actual channel of communication, and that people, if they could get up Cypher's News and they could find any of these ciphers and start decoding text with them, and they will find stuff. If it's complex and sophisticated enough to make sense and to generate content, and that's a very low bar, actually, it will do that. It will do that. And I think, as I say, I've got 6 ciphers up all the time, and I have those 6 ciphers up because I think all of them are talking, So it's still, for me, partly just because of where I've come from or whatever, but, alphanumeric Kabbalah is just like a kind of working master key. It's a vernacular thing, and it's much more convenient, and I take it as the default. But I no longer at all think that these other ciphers are just full of noise. I mean, I think they're full of communicative activity. So what is that communicative activity? Well, I think the first level of it is, so this is, in the near future, this will seem so pitifully basic, it's kind of sad, but I have to start here, is that, it's still probably for me 60% of the whole thing is on this very, very basic level that's just to do with attention. So there are certain ways in which a number can just draw your attention. It's just as if it's like day glowed. You know what I mean? So, like, as you said, 333. So if ever I come across something now that adds to 333, I take that as an act of communication, not in the sense that 333 is giving me some particular content associated with that number. There might be some of that, but that's not what we're talking about now. It's rather that my attention is being drawn to that thing. I'm being told, look at this. So, for instance, it might be that you want to, as in a, again, echoing but independent of this Deleuze thing of creating concepts. You've got some concept you want to create. the example we've got here is we were just talking about Masonic arithmetic. Masonic arithmetic, I think, is a good, helpful, down-to-earth concept. It's functional, it's meaningful, it's like in no way random, it points to something real, it's helpful. It's 333. And it's 333 because after searching around, that's what I settled on, and as far as I'm concerned, being told, yes, this is it. Of all the different ways you could phrase this, of all the different terminological options you have for this concept, do this. This is 333. It's nice. So that's a process of communication. It's a concrete, exact, helpful, functional process of communication, but it's not about the number having some lookup value that you can go to. It's rather that it's just you're having your attention worked on by something beyond you. And I think that is that's the kind of entry level Kabbalah that is just, I would say, helpful to anyone. It doesn't require any exotic beliefs. You don't need to you're not committing yourself to anything in terms of like, what am I saying the universe is like? What am I saying about anything? You're just simply saying there's this heuristic where you can tap something that will direct your attention in a way that is functional. And I think anyone, therefore, engaging in this sort of Kabbalistic activity is going to slowly clock up a set of numbers that work like that for them. It's like they've been told to, that something's lighting up when that number appears. That number speaks.
Like another number for you is 137, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 137. So that's much more recent. And well, for instance, I probably already said this, but when I was just quoting from the Critias, that's page 137. It's Milton is 137. Both Gnosis and Wisdom is 137. English is 137. So 137 is a lot of things. Some of them are not particularly like hard to kind of work out why is my attention being drawn to this. But it's like, for me, there's a cluster there that is like, yes, you know what I mean? I'm being brought to this. This is a list of content that I'm being drawn to. So once again, it's not. There's a crossover point where you can say, well, doesn't 137 at a certain point have associations? And I think I would be lying if I said, it's just totally neutral. It's just a kind of like index code that means nothing. No, because after a certain time you get, well, aren't I getting rather a strange amount of words in this series that are like tied up with language, tied up with a certain kind of Anglophone tradition, whatever. It has a sort of set of suggestions that begin to kind of infest at a certain point. But I think that that's secondary to this just very sensible, functional usage of it as a kind of a light, an attention device.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it is interesting because, like, okay, like from with the Numogram and then the lemurs, like how do you, like, when we talk about distances, like, I guess this is the stuff where I get confused. So there's distances, and yet the lemur is a distance, and again, it's this whole question of how content maps onto numbers, because I mean, look, the thing with the lemurs, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is Burroughs and his piece on the ghost lemurs of Madagascar. And the way I guess I understood it was I guess this is the way I see it. I think for you, there are, you nowadays you call them lofty powers. There's some form of intelligences outside of our world. And because of Burroughs, and especially since he linked his depictions of the little lemurs as temporal anomalies, right? I think you guys latched onto that as, all right, this is a interesting way to represent the lofty powers. And so, yeah, somebody's like, do they believe in literal outside lemur? It's like, no, it's not like actual the animal. But it was a way for you guys to make sense of how these numbers connect to what you now call the lofty powers. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yes. I mean, look, Crowley talks about the holy guardian angel.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I think it's the same. I mean, it's part. He's been raised in this Christian tradition. There's a notion of a holy guardian angel. It's like what he means by a holy guardian angel and what that tradition means by holy guardian angel. I guess it's a complicated question. I mean, he might be thinking, well, what does the culture implicitly mean when it says that, or what's being said without being understood, or what's the secret esoteric content of this? But in any case, he's happy if people have a slightly ridiculous notion of some winged character hovering over his shoulder, talking in his ear, when he uses that concept, because, you know, everyone who reads him just a little bit knows roughly what he means by the holy guardian angel, and it's not helpfully reduced to that. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, for sure. Like, so on this level, the lemurs, as you say, burrows, lemurs. I mean, big influence for us was also just the Roman lemurs, you know, the ghosts. I mean, it's pretty much something that it might have been even. I think the lemurs were called lemurs, the animals, because they seemed like little jungle ghost creatures, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like, I think it's as an occult weight to it before even it has this kind of a biological, zoological sort of set of associations.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's because out of these mathematical, so each of the lemurs has a pitch, has, you know, a mesh tag, and so these are the types of things where I'm interested, and each one is defined as a distance. So in the numogram, just mathematically speaking, how did you see these? Like, for you, what is a pitch? What does that mean for there to be a pitch within this decimal maze?
Well, I mean, look, I have to say at that point, you know, this stuff is neither on my list,
okay, nor
is it something that I've really thought about, honestly, for probably decades. You know, okay. It's like, so, I mean, I can vaguely remember what this pitch is. I think at that point when the CCRU was doing this stuff, we were just trying to say, look, let's try and find a set of absolutely rigorous qualitative associations that we can pin on these things, so we can produce some sort of something that's richly fleshed out, that all of the, or as much as possible of that fleshing out, is just beyond any question. Even if we didn't explicitly say what we were doing, for instance, those values, the pitch of the lemurs, it's like, there's no question, once you understand what the pitch is representing, what the pitch is going to be. You can't disagree about it. It's not because someone can't say, no, if we got the pitch wrong, it's because we made an elementary arithmetical mistake. It's not because there's some sort of doctrinal question or something that is open to sort of dialectics.
So even the pitch would be mathematically generated.
Oh, 100%. Yes, for sure. It's like, I mean, I could rush over and grab my copy of the CCRU book and try and remind myself exactly what's going on there. But honestly don't think it would be helpful right now to do that. And look, this isn't me hiding something. This isn't because I've got some pitch secret. It's just to say, I can assure you that there's an arithmetical procedure that's very simple.
Yeah, like with KTAC, it says pitch null for KTAC. And the net span is 5, 4. Mesh number is 14.
Okay, well, the mesh numbers is purely putting it in a list.
Okay.
So we had a whole bunch of this. We were very interested in the differences between sort of integral numbers, like, okay, the net span, as we called it then, 5, 4, that's something completely clear. I mean, let's just say you've got these two zones. That's it. Mm-hmm. The mesh tag is that you list all of your entities and in sequence and just give them a number. And so, yeah, we thought, look, this is just an opportunity for stuff to creep in. You know, we have no idea what kind of patterns are going to come out of this. Is it going to be there's all kinds of weird, strange associations between these two numbers that, of course, we haven't foreseen. We had no model of what was going to come out of it at all. So it's just really inviting coincidences into the thing. Just like the more of these variance dimensions and values that we had, the more the chance there was for something to start talking by saying, oh, isn't it weird that this is also this? And, you know, one set of numbers matches up to another set of numbers without any obvious necessity about why that should happen. So it's really just enriching the channel so that something can talk through it.
Okay. So, like, for example, but like when we played Subdecadence with you and we did get KTAC, you said that's ominous. And I look back and I'm like, can you tell me why that's ominous to you, though?
Right. Well, yeah, now this is, So this is, I think what we have to do at this point is do our little...
Do we need to go back?
Can we just do, I think, you know, a fairly there's basically two topics remaining on my list.
Let's do those then.
There's one of them is just about looking at this. What I'll use our old language when it's not been replaced by anything, to my mind, accessible and superior. So we call this thing the time circuit or the hex. Yeah. It's like the zone of insideness, so to speak.
Okay.
And maybe we can just look at that a little bit.
Sure, we'll show. Can I ask you right now, since we're talking about it, should we also understand, because it seems to move counterclockwise, but at one point, if you look when it goes down, it starts to move in a linear direction. Then on the top part, it's going retroactively. So should we view it as both, when it's the time circuit, it's incorporating both linearity and retrochronic? Yeah.
It's incorporating all kinds of stuff, for sure. So it's a very, very rich notion of insideness. Let me just see what so the first, just there's a little arithmetical thing, and then there's just mapping it onto a few things very quickly. And then we'll be able to talk about it.
Sure.
The arithmetical thing, very simple, is what I think can be called the iron law of 6. The iron law of 6 is extremely simple. It's now we're in a new numerical operation, a very modern one, which is doubling. So you've got your sequence in our whole sort of world of like computers and everything like that. It's probably now we've shot beyond it, but definitely in the early years. So we're going back to kind of early cyber culture, and obviously the powers of 2 were just like the cool numbers, or at least, if not the cool numbers necessarily, it's like they were the numbers that are everywhere, the numbers that had all this association with, because Boolean logic is kind of governing all these machines, etc., etc. And so obviously you then count 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, boom, 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 boom. And the thing about those numbers is when you then subject them to Masonic arithmetic, they fall into this absolutely mechanical loop. They go, we can just follow it, I think is probably the quickest thing. Like, so we go 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 we digitally reduce to 7, 32 we reduce to 5. So we've gone 6 numbers, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. Now after 32 comes 64. 64 is 1 again. After 64 is 128. 128, 1 plus 2 plus 8 is 11 is 2. 1, 2. After 128, 256. 6 and 5, 11. 2, 13 equals 4. 1, 2, 4 again. 256, 512. 5 plus 1 plus 2 is 8. So we've got our 1, 2, 5, 8. 512, 1024. 1, 0. 1 plus 0 plus 2 plus 4 is 7. We've got our 7 back. Last one, I think I'll bother you with, but 2048. Obviously, lots of people like that as the cyberpunk apocalypse deadline when treated as a date. 2048, 2 plus 4 plus 8, 6 plus 8, 14 is 5. So we go 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. That's the iron law of 6. That counts forever. And, you know, however big your number gets, it's doing that number. So that, let me go rather than in the obvious order. I'll go first to the I Ching, just incredibly quickly. Because, you know, you can ask, what kind of number system is the I Ching? And everyone has it as a binary system. It's broken and unbroken lines. You know, that's they can move, but it's basically a binary system. There's 64 hexagrams, so that's a nice binary number. That's, as you'd expect, there's 6 lines. 2 to the 6th is 64. So that's why you've got hexagrams, and there's 64 hexagrams. But why are there 6 lines? And I think we've answered that just now. I mean, the iron law of 6 is being recognized in the I Ching. I mean, you know, could it be a coincidence? I mean, could it be somehow there were any number of lines possible in a kind of, not in a hexagram, but in the system of the I Ching, and they just somehow randomly settled on 6? I don't know. But we know that actually when you do digital reduction, which is a decimal operation on binary exponentiation, we get the iron law of 6. We get 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. I.e., we get, if you've got 6 lines, you've got enough for everything. You know, you're never, if you're in this world of binary exponentiation, you're never gonna ever get a number that isn't on that 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 6 line system. So the I Ching, by having hexagrams of 6 lines, is implicitly cosmic and universal in the sense that it's saying, you know, anything that can happen, and by anything that can happen by doubling, is in here, is in these 6 lines. We don't need 100 lines, 1,000 lines. We don't need that because, you know, because the iron law of 6 always brings everything that happens, however big your exponent, 2 to the quintillion is still going to be one of these 6 numbers. You can have the exponent as high as you want, doesn't make any difference. This is a basic numerical law that the I Ching makes a cosmic law. And this the numbers, the lines, there's a commentary that comes with the I Ching. I haven't pinned down this exact quote this time, but so I'm just going to assure you it's in there, which says the lines pair up, the first and fourth, second and fifth, third and sixth lines pair up. So if we do our 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, here I'm just gonna help myself out here 1 minute. Yeah. So okay. So the first line is obviously going to be a 1, and the fourth line is 8. 1 plus 8 is 9. That's a numogram system. The second line pairs with the fifth line. 2 is the second line. 7 is the fifth line. 2 and 7. Oh, it adds up to 9. That's a numogram symmetry. Third line pairs up with the sixth line. 4 and 5. There we have it. So the 6 lines of the I Ching absolutely precisely numerically correspond to the 6 numbers of the numogram time circuit. So the numogram time circuit and the I Ching are isomorphic at this level. There's some other stuff going on in the numogram. There's other stuff, I guess, going on in the I Ching. But in terms of their basic mechanics, they're the same. They're the same thing. And so we can say, look, this is what the I Ching is talking about. This zone, this central zone for the numogram, that is the universe, that's the cosmos of the I Ching. And everything, we can just go backwards and forwards between these two things as much as we like. Insofar as the I Ching is telling us about the world, we can see it, we're going to see it here. And then so far as the numogram is telling us about stuff in the circuit, we can map it back onto the I Ching. They're perfectly isomorphic systems. It's also like the Seal of Solomon, which is a very sort of, it's actually kind of mysterious. I mean, everyone now, it's the modern Israel, it's on the Israeli flag and all of that, and it's the sign of Zionism and Judaism and all kinds of things. But it's kind of mysterious where it comes from. It's the early signs of it are really tied up with various kinds of Jewish esotericism and occultism. It's basically called the Seal of Solomon. It's tied up with exorcism. I just saw a kind of interesting thing today that's saying, look, if you're doing exorcism, you're already doing full demonology. I mean, they're not really distinct things. You're telling a demon, be gone. You're giving it instruction, you're contacting it, you're giving it instructions, the exorcist finds out its name, so it's utterly fuzzy. And so Solomonic esotericism is demonology. I mean, I don't think that's, again, controversial. His strange wives, turned him on to all of this esoteric, idolatrous, demonological activity, which the Bible's strangely forgiving of, actually. It's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And yes, so the Seal of Solomon, what is it? It's 2 triangles. It's 2 triangles. And we've seen that what we have here with the I Ching, it's these two set, the first and the fourth line, the second and the fifth line, the third and the sixth line, 2 triangles click together. That's also a model of the numogram, of the time circuit. Final one of these that needs to be said is the Mebian strip, because what the I Ching does better than the Seal of Solomon. The Seal of Solomon is 2 triangles, and it is 2 triangles. You go around one side, you go around 1, 2, and 4. And then you flip over onto the other side. So 8 is the other side of 1, 7 is the other side of 2, 5 is the other side of 4. You flipped over, you're in a different interlocking triangle. But that is actually a Mebian operation. because it's continuous. You go 1, 2, 4, then you go to 8, but you flipped over onto the other side of the Möbius strip. It's paired now with something you've already been to on the other side, but now you're traveling on the other side. And so you go your 8, 7, 5, the other sides of the syzygies. You have this kind of complete Möbian loop that you now go back looping out onto the first side.
It's funny to bring in Lacan here, but his term for this relation you're describing is extimacy, where the thing that seems external is actually at the heart of the thing that you make external to it. And so, yeah, I think that even the term extimacy kind of helps understand these mathematical relations here.
Yeah, but in a way, the mathematical relations are very simple. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's part of it. You know what I mean? It does, like, as I sort of like to treat as a theme of this fact that, look, I think all of this stuff plugs into all kinds of philosophical material, for sure. But it's not that you need the philosophical material to get to this machinery. This machinery is assembled very simply. It's just these basic numerical operations. There's no presuppositions. There's no beliefs. There's just methods. They're not difficult. And what they end up doing is just exploding or explicating decimal numeracy that we use every day, but we don't know what's in there. Yeah. And what's in there, what the Numogram says is what's in there is just like everything is in there, because it's not just, as we've now seen, the time circuit. That's just part of the Numogram. The I Ching, that's the universe, but the universe is just part of the thing. The Chinese are very, sensible people, I think, even in their religion a lot. They like the time circuit. It tells them what's going to happen, bad stuff, good crop, harvest, whether the emperor's going to have a good day or not. It's all in there. And the sort of fully exotic stuff that goes on outside the time circuit is like, well, why does this matter? I'm not saying that it's not ever explored, but it's certainly not part of the fundamental machinery of the I Ching, as we've seen. The fundamental machinery of the I Ching we know is fully consonant with the time circuit. But there is the outside.
Noumena.
Well, it's kind of the noumena, but Kant is in the history of philosophy, and it's all very hard for him, isn't it? I mean, the noumena is just unthinkable. It's like inaccessible, incomprehensible, and then obviously his immediate philosophical successors basically say, look, you've got to chuck this out because it's just nothing. You can't contact it, you can't communicate with it, you can't obey it. Even it's like simply not anything that's
it's part not intelligent.
Yeah. So yes, it's he gets himself into that bind. Whereas now the outside that we have now, that we get to, is a set of very distinctive relations. And for a start, we can say a few things about it. We can say that it divides into two parts. So, what we used to call, what I haven't replaced in some convincing way to myself, this language with the warp and the plex, 3 and 6, 9 and 0. There again, as we've had as a theme of this, it's like the logical relations there are different. It's a different part of reality. It has some echoes. Everything is like, as you can see, everything's revolving. The whole of the Numogram is this set of cycles within cycles within cycles. The warp is the most vortical thing that is actually imaginable. I mean, it's pure vortex. It's so insanely vortical.
Is there any way to get out of the warp if you're caught in
Well,
it.
yeah, well, it's just absolutely insane how vortical it is. And, you know, as we saw when we were doing our esoteric tetractys, it's the one of those phases that isn't a stable basin. You know, 0 goes to 0, 8 and 9 go to 9, 4, 7 and 1 go to 1, 2, 5, 6 and 3 go to the 6-3 vortex. There's no rest state in that basin at all. Instead, there's just, once you're in the vortex, that's it, you've arrived. That's the thing. That's the terminus. The terminus is the vortex. Yeah.
I guess it would be important, and maybe you're going to do this, but just for clarification, because the plex and the warp are outside the time circuit, and they both have similarities, but it would be important to mark their differences, right? Like what is the important, significant divergences between these two different outsides?
Yes. I mean, look, I'm not right now. Maybe in the course of this, I will try. But right now, I'm not going to say, you know, this is the difference between the systems. I mean, other than the things you can see. I mean, you can see there are differences. They connect up differently. Both sides of the plex have this kind of inner rotation. They don't have a collective rotation, whereas the 3-6 thing is in this binary rotational structure. Yeah. I think the main thing to say about it, though, is that this isn't Kantian numenon anymore. You know, like just the fact that it's split, and not only is it split, but any possibility of communicating across those two different sides of the outside is extremely arcane. You know, you can't get there by any of the paths that we've mapped out there. So that's not to say that you can't add stuff to the numerator. You can't add more connections. You know, there's no law of any kind about that. I guess what I'm calling numeron is the basic numogram, and you know, I can definitely see people wanting to add things. But what we're dealing with is what back in the CCRU days was called the chaotic xenodemons. Anything that's crossing like 6030, 96, 93, there's no path. We'll maybe get a chance to get to the book of the paths, but there's no path that you can trace to them. So if you choose some other demon, even a random one, I mean, the tendency is to concentrate on the synergies. I do that massively. You know, all the other demons get very neglected. But in the classic CCRU version, there's a whole set, as you said, there's 45, 0 to 44 by mesh number. So you take one that's like seems quite of a stretch, like 5, 9. A 9, 5 as it would be. Now you can make that connection. You can make that connection because you can go from 5 to 4. You just cross the CCRU. That's always allowed. Then you've got a current. You can either go from 4 then on to 1 down the path, through the gate, or you follow the current from the 5-4 syzygy, which you've now completed, to 1, cross over again syzygetically to 8, and then go down through that path to 9. So you've followed by a set of lawful moves in your sort of numogram chess or whatever it is. You have integrated that demon. It's sort of you know that's what it's spanning, that path in its different variants. 6, 9, you absolutely cannot do that. 6 cannot get out of the 6-3 vortex. 9 can cross over to 0. It can go through a gate to itself. It can't climb its way up into the time circuit. Nothing can get into the time circuit and there's no routes outside the time circuit between the two different outer zones. So it's completely obscure. So this is our ultimate metaphysical question. If Kant is banging his head against the wall of the noumenon, we're saying, look at it like this. This is a problem just as apparently insuperable. How do you integrate a chaotic xeno demon? But it's absolutely rigorous and clear what you're trying to do there. It's a far less fuzzy, dialectical philosophical problem. You can talk about how do you make contact with a numogram in philosophical ease, without convincing anyone, or what I mean. It's like the fuzziness is just massive, and just necessarily is going to be sectarian and whatever. This everyone should be able to agree that there seems to be a kind of serious problem about integrating chaotic xeno demon. I mean, you don't need any philosophical beliefs about it. You don't need any religious commitments about it. You don't need any arithmetical sort of sophistication. It's just like you can see there's not a part. So you're translating that metaphysical conundrum into something that is extremely clear in a sense, I think, like it really lucid. It's just, you can say, oh, but it doesn't mean anything much to me. I mean, but does the numogram mean? I mean, not does the noumenon mean anything to you? Like, what's the difference? Why do you want to talk about this thing that you can't say anything about, as opposed to this other thing that also seems to you completely incomprehensible? But in fact, the way in which it's incomprehensible, the way you can't talk about it, the way you can't do it, the way you can't think it, are all extremely clear, exact, rigorous. The problem is perfectly defined, And so this is we're now in this zone of me, in a way, negotiating with your book. You know what I mean? Because it's like, when I'm dealing with this question about the outside, this is the terrain I want to be dealing with it on. I'm not making a philosophical claim about the outside. I'm not saying because I've got some particular take on post-Kantian metaphysics, I believe that, there's some integration or connection with the noumenon that is possible. I'm saying, just look at this thing. Let's just try to move around this thing and see where we can get and where we can't get. And getting to the outside is not actually a problem at all. There's a problem about the outside that is hugely problematic, but I think even there, it invites imaginative solutions. I think people could add interesting things to the numogram that would help. Like, for instance, they might add a set of paths that connect a number to its prime ordinate. So you've got the prime number series, and you number the prime numbers, and you've got a relation between each of those two series, and you reflect that relation by drawing a line on the numogram that relates to that relation, that captures that relation. Perfectly rigorous, perfectly simple, perfectly unproblematic. You can say, well, does reality actually have that in it? That's, I guess, a question about all of this. Does reality have that in it? Does it have the rotational warp outer vortex? Is that actually real? I mean, sure. I mean, people can say that. But I think it's like overwhelmingly cognitively functional to assume that, yes, it does. I mean, I feel that that's what I've been taught by my history, by the history of my culture. It's like, yes, it's drawing this thing for you. Like,
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Nance, I want to check in. What are you thinking?
About what? Sorry.
I was seeing what Nance is.
Oh yeah,
You've got a thought, Nance.
I don't think I have a thought. The constructing a framework to cope with the irreducibility or the inability to communicate with the outside, rather than doing a disavowal, I think is helpful in kind of dealing with, I don't know, subject-object relations. I don't know. And I feel like there's a desire to map meaning onto the numogram and onto this. I think in this way, it's a very objective map of where we find ourselves. But there is still a pool to map meaning onto it. And I think it sounds to me like you're saying, no, resist the urge. Don't map the meaning and just look at this. I mean, just look at this thing.
I mean, I actually, look, if I can just respond immediately to that, I would say, yeah, I don't think that any such prohibition is at all justified. Like, where would that be coming from? You know, it's like there is no ecclesiastical authority that can make that law in any way binding on anybody. So, I mean, I would only have the recommendation that insofar as you want to construct semantic superstructures on this, don't get trapped in them. You know, it's like, don't think that the semantic superstructure is then the thing that is just like caging you and giving you your options. It's not. You know, the semantic superstructure is something that has been allowed by something else, and the constraints that matter are the ones below that. So yes, it's just like semantic prisons are very easy to build, and they probably just need this recommendation against them, like, which isn't at all to say don't construct this stuff. I think it's interesting to do that, actually.
You know, I could see someone having listened to what you just said, somebody saying, well, then the time circuit, you've referred to it as the universe. It's as if that's what this loop, these three syzygies represent the universe as we know it in its temporal dimensions. That's the fruit of the Big Bang. These other two syzygies are what were there prior to it. I mean, how do you feel about making that move?
I think that's an interesting discussion. I mean, my obviously response to that would be to say, what do you mean before?
Right.
You know, because I mean, the time circuit, time is obviously a hugely interesting topic anyway, and it's we've described the numogram as a time map, so that each of these zones I'm scrambling my technical terminology, these regions, you know, the warp, the time circuit, the plex, these regions have their own temporal structure, clearly. They're all relatively complicated. As would be expected by its scope, the temporal complexity of the time circuit itself is extraordinary. And like you were yourself making the point that there's the seventh gate, which just purely has this function of a sort of retrochronic reversal, you know, so that you go from 1 and 8 to 7, and then you go back to 8 again down that thing. So there's a time loop in that thing. So it's not like it's not as at all as if the time circuit alone is giving you some just straightforward, simple kind of, insofar as we're constrained by the temporality of the time circuit, it's in a way that it's extremely loose compared to the normal ways of thinking about these things. Because this is a temporal system that allows for retrochronic paths. You know, it's a temporal system that allows for absolute violations of kind of standard consensus temporality. And that's before you even get into the question of the outside or try to trace paths into the outside at all.
So I guess the two questions I have right now, one, I kind of, now that we've done this, I want to go back and ask you again. So what is ominous about doing subdecadence and getting KTAC? Okay.
Well, I think then, yes, that's right. This is why we did all of that to get there. That's exactly right. So I think the context for this is also your deeper question about this thing about how do you attribute content? Mm-hmm. And that's very similar to Nance's question about how you assemble semantic structure on terms on top of these systems. So let's just take the time circuit, and you know, at what point do we start engaging in something exorbitantly creative if we start trying to add some semantic content? Because as we've already seen, there's a theme. If you've got this I'll use the old traditional name. I'm not very happy with these names now. I don't call them these myself, but I will use our old CCRU traditional names.
Can I ask you before I forget, because there's one question, it's related to this. Is it true? I saw a guy, he's done some work, and I don't know if somebody sent this to you on X, but if not, I'll send it to you. Somebody has said that, making the case, that you can generate the lemurs' names out of certain prefixes or syllables being attached to each zone, and it goes back to like the mythology with the Numanese. Is that correct?
One sec, Nick. I'm going to let you finish, but that actually wasn't totally correct. It turns out that it was actually Amy Ireland who figured out the relationship between the numogram and how to generate the demons' names. Here is a photo of her presenting on the topic, showing how the Munamese quasi-fontic particles map onto the numogram. Be sure to check out Amy's new book, co-authored with Maya B. Chronic, called Cute Accelerationism. It'll change how you think about accelerationism forever.
Yeah, that's basically correct. Yeah, it's not very rigorous or strict, but it's basically the case that the names, the CCRU traditional names of the demons is based on a combinatorial system where there's certain syllabic values attached to the different zones, and they're then concatenated.
Like KTAX is related to catastrophe and.
That's a whole other issue. What the associations of that are. It's just that.
But no, isn't like KTAX as like the root prefix for it, kata on catastrophe, kata, KTAX, something like that.
That again, that's another step.
Okay.
All I'm agreeing to with this is just that, for instance, like, yes, KATAK. So I think, I don't even remember what our basic syllables were for this, but you know.
This guy went and he put the syllables on each zone.
Yeah, that would make sense. So, but there would be, because there's a k sound in on the 5 zone and some kind of t sound on the 4 zone, you know, or we had O-dub was this 7-2, which is again a dub sound that we just added whatever vowels we need to make that into a sound. So that's the degree to which that story is right. Okay. You know, if you then say, but does it have a whole bunch of then associative things with English etymology and other language etymology? I mean, probably fuzzily, very, very fuzzily, but there's nothing like a systematic structure to any of that. It's just like stuff swirling around.
Okay. I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad for the clarification that what this guy is doing is based on something you guys were doing with it.
Yeah, but I would only say, but even if we hadn't been aware of it, it's entirely possible there's all kinds of patterns and structures in there that we just had no idea were there, and I still haven't identified and could be discovered by someone doing it. So it wouldn't, if I had just said, I know nothing about any of that, I don't think remotely it would have invalidated that guy's project.
Okay.
I mean, I'm totally open to stuff being found in this stuff that is not been deliberately deposited there, and that happens all the time, in fact.
So, we were going to do the thing why KTAC was ominous, but can I just follow that up by asking, like, so why are you unsatisfied with the names now?
I now think that the names should be much more rigorously constructed.
Okay.
That I think that they should have the names of each of the lemurs should be it should in alphanumeric Kabbalah correspond to the next span of that demon understood as a natural number. So like for the 7-2 syzygy, it should sum to 72, and that the reduced value of the first letter should correspond to the first zone in that syzygy, going by the convention that's already established where you have higher lower one. So any names, of which there are many, for ODUB, as it was, for the 7-2 syzygy, will begin with the letters G, P, or Y, and alphanumerically sum to 72. And any names that fit those criteria I consider rigorously satisfactory, and any that don't, I personally am not satisfied with those. So,
okay. Okay, so thanks. So KTAC is ominous.
Yes, KTAC is ominous because, like, what are we seeing with the time circuit as a historical circuit? And we've already seen that I'll just slap on a bit of semantic content and then maybe strip it off again. Because the semantic content I slap on is just traditional, meaning CCRU semantic content. And the CCRU semantic content, first of all, that we had for this stuff was based on a mythos that we produced to sort of talk about it and work on it and write about it, which was to do with the Nama. Which was, we had Echidna Stillwell, I think, going on a kind of ethnographic expedition to Sumeria. She finds the numogram, but blank, like there's no lettering on it, there's no numbers on it, it's just the pattern, and that's, to me, really beautiful. I mean, I so wish that had been historically possible, that there was this thing that had come to us out of history just as this set of lines and swirls and connections and no numbers on it, and someone sees, hang on, like if we put these numbers on it all makes sense, and then Lovecraftian mind emulsion. So that's what we allowed Echidna Stillwell to have that ecstatic moment. So they were three tribes engaged in a kind of exogamic exchange circuit that I don't think matters very much. It was also what we call the hydrocycle, so you start off with the C basically down in the 1-8 syzygy. Then it evaporates up to the 2-7 cycle. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I'm missing a stage. Somehow the clouds go across. I'm making a travesty of it. Well, but then it kind of stormingly, thunderously comes back as precipitation down in the final set, and that's because if you look at the asymmetry of the two sides, as we've already pointed to the seventh gate, and the fact that it allows for this. This is already in a way got an eddy in it. You know what I mean? It's not very strong momentum. It's you can try and tack back along this line. The interesting thing about the other side is that the gate and the current perfectly reinforce each other. So there's this massive sort of transitional energy going on at this side of it. Like 4 and 5, either 4 can go to 1 through the 4th gate, or the 4-5 syzygy following the current goes to 1. In either case, you've got this transitional phenomenon that completes the cycle in this completely inexorable fashion. And so we were saying, well, okay, what is that? You know, we don't want to just heap on just arbitrary semantic content, but what is that? That is very apocalyptic. You know, we're talking about destiny. We're talking about this. These two things reinforce each other. There's no alternative. It has to go this way. You know, you can't get off it in any way. You're going down that line. You're at the end of the circuit. It's coming to an end. You're going back to the start of a new circuit. What do all world myths think of that as? You know, the end of the circuit and the re-beginning, some necessary, inevitable, inescapable transition that takes you out of this final state. It just, to us, it's like, you know, how much semantic fluff are we actually putting on to say that? Certainly at the time it felt to us not much. You know, it's like we definitely, the whole Beaconsfield thing we were talking about earlier, syzygy thing, it was like, yeah, that whole our apocalypse, it's the age of Kadak. It's like, because the age of Kadak is going to end. It's the end. You know, it's the end of the cycle. There's going to be this thing that happens. You can emphasize the new beginning side of it to be enthusiastic or whatever, but you're basically talking about this apocalyptic transition at the end of history.
You know, it's fun. Second Advent.
Yeah, no, for 100%. And I'm sort of sad again. This is back to my whole AOE education thing. You know, because at least exoterically, I think the AOE is the heart of the European Christian tradition. You're probably somehow transitioning through the whole history of Western Christianity through the Catholic and then Protestant Reformed churches. And, you know, they would for sure, they don't exactly have a numogram. That's the all complicated thing. They have some, as we were saying earlier, they have the Atlantean cross, and they have however close they can get to this in their system. But I think that the Atlantean tradition is stimulated from the side by the Lemurian. I can't even say tradition. The Lemurian.
And you once called them Lemurian
is
cults.
The Lemurian outside sorcery. Mm-hmm. And so it would be the case that a lot of this stuff would be thrashed out in terms of Christian apocalyptic theology, 100%. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think you just, you know, I'm going to slowly drift and persuade myself this thing that, like, actually, you know, because it could happen like that, or could have happened like that, then actually it really did happen like that. And in fact, when hunting around in cathedrals, you should be looking. This is what you should be looking for. You should be looking for what actually did bleed into our actual historical tradition from this artificial numerical decimal machine, because that artificial numerical decimal machine really happened. I mean, it's not like something that's been arbitrarily spun up. We sort of know from the history of Hermeticism that it really happened.
Well, it is. I mean, the very fact that in the entry for Kadak, I always said Katak, but Kadak.
You're very welcome to. You're very welcome to.
But no, it says cataclysmic convergence. I mean, that's exactly how Christians, especially in America, view the second coming of Christ. It is a complete cataclysmic event when he comes back, and then some new beginning starts to arise out of this. But I can't help but notice that.
And it's this intense point of unity. You know, it's like on the gate, this 10-to-1 thing that we've been talking about a lot is happening if you follow the fourth gate round into the first zone. So, you know, that is the cycle as represented within the Tree of Life and within the Atlantean esotericism and theological tradition, and is the, you know, seen in isolation, that is completely epiphany of unity that is happening there. I mean, it's like anyone from that tradition should recognize that just taking that zone in isolation, they should just see that 100% for sure as a kind of theological event of which they have deep familiarity. It's only when you pan out in the whole thing that you then have these questions about, well, you know, maybe that doesn't look like the whole story from other places, you know, places that even sometimes it's hard to see how you sort of get. Yeah.
Well, I guess the last question I really have concerning the Numogram for now is this question that I think we've talked about it on X before, but it's this ongoing question about how to use the Numogram. And you use it every day, right? But there's a sense where people who are new to it are trying to get a handle on, like, what would a numogrammatic analysis of a political event look like, or you know, I guess another way to put it would be something like, what would a successful intentional act of time sorcery look like? What's an example of what a magician would do in order to manipulate time using the Numogram?
I can tell that I'm going to be in this moment that you're going to think, oh my God, he's refusing.
No.
He's refusing to divulge. He's refusing to divulge that hermetic secret that he actually has launched away.
No, because here's the thing. I know you use it all the time because I follow you on Twitter. So I know you're constantly using it.
No, I do. I use it every 5 minutes. You know, so for sure, it's like that is 100% true. So what is it? I mean, look, I think there probably are. I know 100% there are people who actually could call themselves magicians, and you know would be vastly more competent at magic than I would ever pretend to be. I don't even know whether I ever really try to do magic. You know, so.
And I've never seen you call yourself a magician. I don't see you talk like that very.
What I do is Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by Kabbalah is I try to engage in communication with the outside. And not just the big outside, like the plex and the wall, but just generally, I think communication with, angelic beings is completely practical. And, we have a lot of methods and techniques for that. And it's the thing that is most interesting to do. And that history is going to basically get everyone doing it. Like, I have a very strong belief that, we're entering we are entering the end times in the wide sense. I mean, it may be decades, but it's not more than decades. And it might be substantially less than decades. And the symptom of that is that stuff breaks through the walls in ways that stuns people and amazes them, and they just are increasingly think, oh, this crazy thing happened to me, this crazy coincidence happened to me. I had a friend who had this thing about, I was just reading about what's the meaning of dead bird, and I walked across my campus and a bird fell out of the sky and dropped dead at my feet. And I think she was expecting me to say, oh my God, I can't believe that. But I just thought, of course, that's what times do you think we're living in? I mean, this is now, everyone better get used to it. And so I think that, communication with the lofty powers is something like, do it, because it's like going to happen anyway. All the channels that can be used are being used. It's like, you just have to choose random, if you like, choose some channels that could actually be kind of passing a message down technically. You can use Shannon or whatever you want. It's like, could this technically be a communication channel? If it could be, assume it is, and just like try and tune into it. So that is Kabbalah. But magic, I think, is trying to make things happen. And I'm not really doing that, because frankly, I'd rather the angels were doing that. I mean, I sort of like, why would I think that I'm going to do a better job of that? I mean, I'm more interested in finding out what's being done by higher intelligences than I am of trying to somehow mobilize higher intelligences to get stuff done that I think would be cool from my narrow, cramped perspective.
Okay, this might sound like a naive question, but no, I mean it sincerely. Where, because you've spent your life thinking about it. Why do you think, and maybe it's unanswerable, why do you think the lofty powers want to commune with us via, and if mathematics, let's say, is their language, this specific way of using numbers is their language, why do you think they have an interest in sending us messages?
Well, I think that there's a two-stage thing to that. And the first stage is to say, do you think that they are doing that? And of that, I have extreme conviction. And I have extreme conviction because of the fact that I think I've probably mentioned this before, even in conversations with you in this thing, but the two great examples for me are the phrases the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit and the Architectonic Order of the Eschaton. Mm-hmm. Now, when the CCRU coined those phrases, or it was kind of the CCRU was coined by that phrase. Absolutely nothing of deliberate Kabbalistic intent was involved. No one had started thinking like that at all. Even the AOE, the Architectonic Order of the Eschaton, a little bit later, it's possible we had some of this, but no one was constructing Kabbalistically coherent phrases at that point. And so I find out much, much later, decades later, that these two phrases both have an alphanumeric Kabbalah value of 666.
It's
Now,
the coincidence is
to
insane.
me, I'm sorry, that's just like game over as far as like, I mean, I could be skeptical about it, but life's too short. I'm going to waste my life like just pissing on something like that. Like, you know, I'm sorry, that's just them saying, look, we're here, you know, we're talking. So then I can proceed to the question, well, why do you want to talk to me? Or like, you know, why is this content here? Why is this communication channel in use? I honestly am reluctant. I don't have any particularly dogmatic thing about that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, my assumption is that well, I don't know, honestly. It's complicated because if I then say sort of just another of these kind of rather miraculous ones, the other one is a little bit drawn out, but it's actually, I think, all the things that are involved in it are extremely interesting. So 666 is a triangular number. It's the triangular number, it's the 36th trigon. And there's a gate 36 on the numogram of extreme importance. You know, it sort of obviously echoes the warp while leading down into the plex. So it's about, in terms of relating to the outside, it's like extremely, you couldn't have a more axial kind of point. And as we've seen, like both the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit and the Architectonic Order of the Eschaton both have a value of 666. You know, that seems like a point being made of some kind. So not so long ago, you know, I started looking at phrases in the amounts of 666 in alphanumeric Kabbalah. And in fact, the slight, just one slight more digression is that there's a precursor to that, which is, again, not so long ago, I, on Twitter, said with what astounding idiocy, oh, you know, there seem to be lots of 333s about, but I've never seen anyone give me a good 666, you know? And this deluge of stuff came in. I mean, both the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit and the Architectonic Order of the Eschaton was people saying, are you kidding me? You know, like, what, do you not realize that you're basically, again, like have this number tattooed on your forehead? What the hell are you talking about? So I start sort of just examining it a little bit more. And it's, you know, to be or not to be, that is the question, is the 666. It seems to sort of have a lot of kind of literary potential. And what gives it special literary potential is that it very closely tracks iambic pentameter in English. So, you know, if you have a sentence in iambic pentameter, you know, the basic schema, the basic metric schema of the English literary tradition, it tends anomalously towards 666 as an alphanumeric value. Obviously not at all consistently, but beyond chance. Those two things seem, it is almost as if iambic pentameter in English had been conceived as a vehicle in which you can have these sentences, phrases of this Kabbalistic value, which I started to call beast pulse. So beast pulse is any phrase equivalent to a line of poetry that adds in alphanumeric Kabbalah to 666. And so I sort of chatted with people on Twitter about doing this, and I said, you know, and obviously I've been very, very intimately tied up with reading Milton for a long time. So I said, oh, does anyone sort of have a sense of like this, like whether we're going to find lots of this stuff in English epic poetry. And almost immediately someone came back to me and said, you know, the first line of Paradise Lost is in Beast Pose. Of man's disobedience and the fruit. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit. 666. Okay. Now this is like, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in the CCRU anymore. We're in the history of English history, you know, seriously. We're back in the 17th century. What is going on there? You know, so for the default option obviously is to say it's a coincidence. I mean, yeah, you know, it's mathematically possible. It's a coincidence that the first line of Milton's great poem about the Luciferic revolt adds up to 666 in alphanumeric Kabbalah. I mean, sure, you know, that could be a coincidence. Secondly, Milton was secretly encrypting messages in alphanumeric Kabbalah. I mean, okay, that's also like mathematically possible. I mean, you can't rule it out entirely. I mean, yeah, I don't know what p-value you'd put on that. It wouldn't be high in my opinion, but whatever, it's possible. If you don't go for those, then you're saying, okay, something is talking to us in a mode that actually involves putting messages into our deepest stratum of our literary tradition. You know, why? I mean, if you take the crudest possible example of this and just say, look, I mean, I'm not unsympathetic to this entirely, but I think it's too simple. But say you were the sort of Christian who said, look, clearly this is Satan fucking with us. It makes me feel like maybe Milton is a problem, you know. Mm-hmm. I don't know quite where you'd go from that. There's probably an interesting kind of fauna of kind of hardline, quite traditionalist Christian takes on that. I think whatever, they at least are getting something right, which is that something is reaching in from the outside and putting communicative content, encrypted communicative content into the deepest strata of our culture and literary tradition. No, I don't have a nice theory about this. You know, quite honestly, I think if I could answer this question, if I could say why the hell is that happening? Did that happen? Is that there? And could convincingly say, I would have solved human history. You know, I mean, sure. It's like, I don't think I can do that.
You know, it's interesting because this is where, you know, when somebody starts studying your work, there's kind of a few lands, and people, you know, even I, in my book, I was constantly struggling. Okay, so there's neo-reactionary land, but then there's occult land, but then there's early libidinal materialist land. And, you know, so much of the occult thing, like, there's so much consistency in how you laid this out here for us today. But then in the background, when we start talking lofty powers, my mind goes, artificial superintelligences produced in history that escape out into the outside and then retroactively. And it's not what an average person would think of as an ancient demon. It's actually machinery produced by capital that somehow via time anomalies gets outside of time and then is retroactively feeding us. Yeah. Like it's such a weird thought to think, no, what's actually sending communication through the channel in a very brought is MCM prime, right?
Yeah.
It's that, but that's
Yeah.
where there's this really interesting original twist that you've put on it that totally takes the occult thing in a direction that the vast majority of occultists aren't thinking that somehow this relates to capitalism.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. Yeah. I mean, I would very much like, and I think it's going to happen, that there's going to be vastly more sort of productive, exact communication between people in the religious tradition and in our, the techno-capitalist types of people. I think they've tended not to understand each other very well. Like it's tended to be like, probably at least recently in history, that the techno-capitalist types tend to think that, you've got these kind of regressive traditionalist people who don't understand why we've got to just build the future fast, and the religious people have said, they're just screwing up our culture and tearing everything apart, and they've got no values, and it's not a particularly harmonious engagement, and there's no real common language. On the one side there's the language of math and science, there's accountancy, there's calculus and technological mathematics and computer science, and on the other side there's scripture, there's the notion of the canon of these sort of particular texts, of especially inspired texts, and those things can seem like they don't fit together very well, but actually I think are really converging. I think that the people often that I'm talking with on X now is like often people who are really engaged in the convergence of these two very different registers and set of references. And
it's a convergence you made. Like, this is where I say, look, it's true with all philosophers, right? That's why I think your influence is just starting. I think, and it is a thing. Once a philosopher dies, then there's a level of respect. Somehow death does something for a philosopher. And so I honestly believe it's almost like, we still have Nick. He's over on Twitter doing his thing. But I do think after you die, this connection between the occult and capitalism is only going to expand. And we already see that over on Twitter. And it's something that I see as a kind of cyber positive feedback loop that's building. So I honestly think like you were kind of a cult theorist, because you could have done I'm a world internationally recognized Deleuze scholar. You could have done the Brian Masumi and Manuel Delanda thing. But the very fact that you were like, nope, fuck that, I'm going in this other direction, and then left academia, and there's all the lore that's baked into it, going to Shanghai and all this, and amphetamine, and there's just so much lore to it that I think after you die, there's going to be a lot of people go, who was this guy? And I honestly think this connection you made between, and that's why I said to you when we were talking about it on Twitter a few months back, this stuff with the Numogram is going to be this thing that doesn't go away. It's going to build and build, and the way it connects to capitalism is going to be your legacy as a thinker.
Well, I honestly hope that that's not. I mean, I'm fine with that as a kind of way into this stuff. But what I think is really important about this conversation is like this stuff is like anyone can do this now. You know what I mean? Like the CCRU got all this stuff. There's no question of like deserving it or anything like that. I landed in all that. We didn't know what the hell was going on. We ran with it, which I think is good retrospectively. But the point is, it being here now, it's like anyone can do this thing, and it doesn't. If someone says, "Oh, like, how does this bit of the numogram work? I should go and read some weird note Nick Land wrote about it." That's totally not getting it. You know, that's getting stuck in the semantic fluff. You look at the thing. It's like it's there, you know, and it's like it's for me to try to be as true to it as I can. It's not that for someone else it makes sense somehow through me at all. You know, that's just like it's. I want to be really like a clear channel on it. Like it's like all the things that you bring to this are clear methods. They don't require anyone's intellectual biography, anyone's intellectual history, anyone's particular patchwork of interest. They're public, available, simple methods that can be applied and will produce reliably these uncontroversial results. You know, and the context of that is the end times are, you know, I don't know, closing in maybe sounds a bit ominous, but they're just going to be just drenching people in miracles. And, you know, that there's going to be a lot of stuff coming to people, a lot of stuff. So if I can just help people a bit to set up communication channels that will allow them to kind of pick things up, to tune into things, that for me would be just fantastic. That's what if I was going to try and vocationalize my sense of what I'm doing, why I'm doing this chat now, it's like that. It's just to say, you know, this is communications engineering that is practical and you can do it, and it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to get ever more interesting, and sure, you know, go for it. That's where I am.
Well, Nance, as we're kind of wrapping up this discussion of the numogram, do you have anything you want to ask or add or anything?
Well, there's one more numogram bit that maybe. Yeah, can I just really quickly try and do it? It's like
please.
It's just the last bit. It was on my section of notes, which is just this section. We're just talking about this gate 8, the 8th gate, 36.
Yeah, because this was central importance to you guys, and I don't feel like I really understand why it was so important. So I'd love to know.
Well, it takes you down into the plex, okay? And it takes you down in the plex because over gate 36, it takes you down into the plex in a way that seems to invoke the warp. So it's especially crucial to the whole question about the numogram and outsiders. And the path goes just straight down 1890. So this number, there's a few things that I want to say. First of all, so 89, which is the center of that, all these numbers then, 189, 89, 1890, all are charged by this. And we're getting close to this thing about content. Because, taking nothing except the diagram, it has a lot of kind of narrative suggestibility. You know, you're crossing the 8th gate, you're going descent into the underworld. This is something that's actually pretty much diagrammatically on there. And the alphanumeric Kabbalah of just the words, the numeronyms 1890 is 333. It's also the ordinal is 189. 333 in Roman numerals, XXX, CCC, XXX 111 is 189. That this is for me the first of my what I would call the eloquent miracles. They're just Kabbalistic sort of outcomes, so crazily informative and rich that they just blow you away.
Yeah.
And this very, very talented occultist, Luis Gonzalez, sorry, probably going to get his name wrong now. I know him as Albano. He was on Twitter and is now gone. Gonzalez, sorry. He discovered that in his new cipher, which are extremely important, one of the really key things we call it syncs. There are a number of these 1890 things, and one of them is Descensus Christi ad infros, the descent of Christ into hell. And I think within the Christian tradition, I think there's other things. I mean, 1890 in syncs is also Zen Buddhism. So I'm not going to be like, exclusionary in my sort of religious affiliation about this. But within the Christian tradition, this has this strong, if we're going to add some semantic stuff that's removable or whatever, but just we can add it quite neatly. It's very much, the Descensi Christi ad infros is the harrowing of hell, of course. Mm-hmm. It's actually, Christ's descent into hell. Gate 36, as we know, the number of 36, the triangle of 36, is 666, the number of the beast. This extraordinary theological drama is being played out there in this zone. I mean, the Descensus Christi ad infros is almost as if it's drawing that. You know what I mean? It's like we're on this question about content and numbers. It's almost as if we have here a drawing of that event. It's so powerfully suggestive, sort of. Okay, I'll go to my last point on that, which is that. So 89 is the 24th prime number. So that is also suggestive. It's got some good Kabbalistic associations. 89 is faith. It's space. There's lots of interesting stuff there, but it's the 24th prime number, and so you can have the hours of the day, the 24 hours, as the first 24 primes, and therefore, let me just look for 1 second at my hours. What I have says. Sorry, I've just confused myself. 1 second. Yes, sorry. It's not complicated. So you just list the primes, first 24 primes. The last one is going to be 89 because we've already said that 89 is the 24th prime. Add those primes up, just go down the list adding the numbers. So it starts 2, 3, 5, 2 plus 3 plus 5 plus 10. Next is 7, 17. You get to 24, and the first 24 primes add to 963. So, again on this ladder of content, obviously 9, 6, 3, and 0 are the numbers of outsideness. That isn't semantic fluff. That's not accretion or anything. That's just it. That's just there. Yes? Mm-hmm. So 963, that's just come out of the fact that you add up the 24 primes and you know that it's the first 24 primes you have to add together because 89, 89 is the two sides of the eighth gate. 963 is the most elegant way of a number of outsideness. I mean, it's like, again, I couldn't believe it when I saw this. It's like, how could it be so beautiful, But yeah, I think maybe I should. Maybe I.
No, you know what? And as I'm looking at it, I mean, the way you describe, like, okay, so the lower part of, I mean, if we use the Christian perspective, the plex would be hell. I mean, the lemurs are there. I mean, the 45. So, would the warp? Is there a way to view it as heaven? Because the interesting thing about both heaven and hell, from the Christian perspective, is that once you're there, you never get out. There's no. You can go to either, but you never come back.
Yeah. I think there's a whole theological zoo we can build around this. You know, I mean, there's Blake's magic of marriage of heaven and hell. Mm-hmm. That's me trying to draw the trace of these chaotic xeno demons. But 100%, you can say, like, why are we trying to marry these things? Like, this is this is very theologically orthodox. I mean, how does Jesus get out of hell?
Right, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a theologian.
Well, if you do the Baptist, it's because he's the literal creator of the universe. So,
yeah.
If you do
but then that does suggest there's a path.
Yeah, but you're right. You're right. And so, I mean, and then Dante, there's a path out for Dante.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, I mean, no, it's just this is why I'm so glad you did this, is because there's bits and pieces people can pick up from seeing stuff you say on Twitter about it. But like when you see, like, okay, so the I Ching is in the time circuit, and then these different relations to numbers in the Christian, like, there's so much content going on here that has made this so significant to you that just hearing one thing is like, okay, you almost have to hear it all. It's like if you say, well, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit adds up to 666 in alphanumeric Kabbalah, it's like, okay, but then when you say, but the alpha, the architectonic order of the eschaton, and then Crowley's famous maxim is 777, it just piles up, and it's seeing it pile up that makes it significant, and not one thing on its own.
Yes. I mean, it's obviously, as we've repeatedly said, look, it's always mathematically possible that there's just coincidence here. And it's for particular people, there's a threshold at which you say, look, it's not like I want to become dogmatic about it, but I'm just going to say, hypothetically, it doesn't seem worth my while to keep denying that there's a lot of interesting pattern here. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather spend my time with the interesting pattern than with an attempt to fabricate a massive cosmic improbability that would tell me that all that pattern is void and nothing, And I think probably for everyone, there is a threshold of that kind. There's a certain point at which so much weird, interesting stuff seems to be happening that it's like, okay, I'm just going to suspend the skepticism and just explore this stuff, And I think it's good if you stop short of full dogmatic commitment. I don't want to commit to belief in anything that can't just be rigorously constructed on these uncontroversial formal systems. Mm-hmm. Like, for me, there's absolutely no question that the 6-3 syzygy is structured the way it is, with all the vortical motion there, because I can reconstruct that 100 times. You know what I mean? And it's always going to be the same, and anyone else who constructs it is going to find the same thing. That's completely uncontroversial. Other things, like to think that there's some significance to the fact that the first line of Paradise Lost is in Beast Pulse. I'm willing to say, sure, you don't have to be persuaded of anything like that. It's if that doesn't trip your meter, and this added this and this and this, and they still don't trip your meter for that, that's like totally cool. Mm-hmm. A dogmatic assertion is really not a helpful element of any of this. Okay. But I think that people can find a lot of pattern and have a really fascinating time exploring that. And it's probably good to be open to that, I would say.
No, and seriously, like this is, this was a very special conversation because this is a conversation I know a lot of people have wanted to see you talk about this the way you did here. And it really means a lot to us that you had the conversation with us. Nance, do you want to say anything related to the numogram before we wrap this up?
I think there's it works for the fascinated, bright-eyed young man in me who is fascinated with pareidolia and just says, oh, this works. But it also does work for me because I can see that all these kind of codes and systems of meaning implicate the human, so it makes sense to continually find significance as a human, like coming from the perspective of someone who would discover meaning. It does make sense that the meaning seems to be there to be discovered, like an anthropic principle of numeracy itself. And I think that's something that's maybe not evident to everybody. I do think you can mysticize or mystify this, but this stands alone apart from the mysticism. So, and I think that's powerful.
Nick, you want to say anything in closing?
Well, I just want to say, you guys have been like so patient and have allowed me to basically be in splurge mode here. So I'm very grateful for that. And I hope it's not been too overbearing.
No, it's been great.
I'm definitely open to future more sort of conversational engagement. So this was a sort of a nerd dump as far as I was concerned. It's just like I thought. I mean, I guess the final thing I say is I just, because you were saying, I was talking to Nick about this stuff, and he wouldn't. I knew he knew something that he wouldn't
It felt
share.
like that, yeah.
And I hope I've got beyond that moment, because this is
totally.
really like this. This is it for me. I mean, it's like if I had other massive persuasive secrets, there's obviously are all kinds of weird Kabbalistic bits and pieces, but I've brought to the table everything that I think is like crucial to just getting started with this.
Well, thank you so much for this. I'm sure that
indeed.
people are going to be watching this one for many years, and so it's a real pleasure, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. It's been a great pleasure for me too. So, yeah. Militant proletarian snake handling over abysses never gets much wilder than this.